This started back in late 2020 when my family bought a cheap apartment in a suburb outside of Pune, India. It wasn't meant to be our main place, more like an extra property that we could use when needed. The reason that it was so cheap was because the previous owner, an elderly guy, had died there and his wife wanted to sell quickly and move in with some relatives. At the time, none of us really cared about that detail, to be honest. We just thought that we got a good deal. For the first few months, nothing really unusual happened, too. I was actually the one using the place the most because I had just gone through a breakup and wanted somewhere quiet to stay alone. During the COVID period especially, I'd go there by myself, sit in the dark, play games for hours, and basically just sort of zone out. I kept most of the lights off except for a small lamp because I liked the place feeling pretty empty anyway. Now, after a while though, I started noticing small things that didn't make sense but weren't dramatic enough to immediately freak me out. Like the temperature inside would suddenly drop, even when all the windows were closed. Sometimes I'd feel this weird heaviness, like the air pressure in the room had changed. I'd also hear sounds from the dining area that were similar to furniture being slightly shifted. At first I assumed it was neighbors upstairs or just normal building noises echoing weirdly. But still, there were times when I'd get this sort of sudden urge to leave. Not a logical thought, more like my brain going, "You need to go right now." I'd save whatever I was going through and doing and grab my keys and just sort of get out of there quickly without really understanding why. One night though, something happened that made it impossible to ignore anymore. It was around 2 a.m. and I was sitting on the window ledge in my room with the lights off, just looking outside at the empty street. There was one street light and no people anywhere, and while I was sitting there I noticed a dark shape inside of the room behind me near the doorway. It looked like a person standing still. My first thought was that it had to be a shadow from outside, but when I leaned out the window to check, the street was completely empty. There was no movement, no cars, nothing. When I turned back though, the shape wasn't there anymore too. Before I could even process that too, my mother started knocking hard on my door from the hallway. She sounded panicked and kept telling me to come and sleep in the living room. That was really unusual because she normally wouldn't react like that over anything. I didn't argue though, just grabbed my phone and went there with her. The next day though, she told me that apparently she had seen something. You see, she'd been sitting on the couch scrolling on her phone, and from where she was sitting she could see the dining area and the refrigerator, and she said that she noticed what she thought was my dad standing next to the fridge, just facing her and not moving. She asked him to bring her some water, but he didn't respond. She called his name louder, and that's when the figure moved quickly into the kitchen. She followed immediately, but when she got there, the kitchen was empty. Then she checked the bedroom and found my dad asleep, and that's when she realized that what she had seen could not have been him, and she came straight into my room. Even after that too, I still used the apartment because my entire gaming setup was there, so I just sort of changed my routine. I only went during the daytime and I never stayed after sunset. Even then though, I would feel uneasy for, well, no clear reason that I could put my finger on. Anyway, a few months later, another incident happened when I brought my ex over one afternoon to watch a movie. We had the lights off and just the TV on, and there were 2 glasses on a shelf near the bed, and one of them suddenly fell off by itself and shattered on the floor. We both jumped, but I still tried to explain it as maybe just unstable placement. I cleaned it up and I went to go and wash my hands, but when I came back, we were about to sit down on the bed again when we noticed something that made both of us stop instantly. There were dozens of small metal pins scattered across the mattress, and I can assure you that they were not there before. Those pins were normally kept inside of a container in my parents' room across the apartment. There was no way that they could have ended up on my bed without someone physically moving them. And it was right after that too that we began to notice what we thought was a dragging noise from the dining area, exactly like somebody pulling chairs across the floor. At that, my ex completely lost it and insisted that we leave right now. I didn't argue, to be honest. We left within minutes, and I didn't go back for weeks after that. Eventually, my grandmother got involved, and she's very religious and insisted that we do a cleansing ritual. She brought someone that she trusted, and they performed some prayers and burned some cleansing materials inside of the apartment. During that process, they asked me to hold a bowl of burning incense and to stand exactly where I had first seen the dark shape months earlier. And the moment that I stepped into that spot, I felt unbelievably dizzy, like the room was spinning for a few seconds. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. After that day too, the atmosphere in the apartment noticeably changed. The heaviness feeling disappeared completely, the strange noises stopped, and as far as I can tell, nothing else has happened since then. We still own the place, and these days it just feels like a normal empty apartment, but I personally don't stay there alone anymore. Not because anything is still happening, but because I just don't trust whatever explanation fits what we experienced back then, and I don't know, something says to me that this whole situation, it hasn't actually been resolved. This happened back in late 2021, during the second COVID wave. I was 12 at the time, and because schools were closed, my mother sent me to stay with my cousin's family. My cousin's dad, he ran a small delivery business with an old pickup truck. He'd take me along sometimes to help load and unload stuff, and so I'd get familiar with the roads in the area there. Most nights too, we would get back at around 10 p.m, but one night a delivery ran late and we left the last drop-off at around 11. The roads were empty and pitch dark, except for our headlights, obviously. These rural roads are pretty narrow and winding and flanked by dense forest on both sides. Normally it was maybe a 40-minute drive to get back, but that night it felt way longer, like the road just sort of kept going on and on. My cousin's dad was quiet too, but I could feel his unease. He wasn't saying anything, probably not trying to freak me out. About 45 minutes in though, fog started rolling in. Not just a little bit of mist too, this was thick, low, and completely covered the whole road ahead. Headlights were barely penetrating it, and I remember a weird smell, like damp earth mixed with something metallic. I tried to focus on the road, but that's when I noticed a shadow, or something at least, standing just beyond the edge of the fog on the right. It wasn't a person, but it was huge. It was humanoid-shaped, but dark and featureless, almost like a solid shadow. Its limbs were way too long for a normal human, and it didn't move like a person too. The longer that I looked at it, the more that it seemed to blend into the fog, and I swear that it was watching us. My cousin's dad didn't see anything at first, but when I pointed, he froze. And then, here's the weird part. So the next thing that I remember is waking up in cold water. My shoes were soaked, my legs were aching, and my head felt like it was filled with lead. My cousin's dad was beside me, fumbling for his phone and turning on the flashlight. That's when we realized that we were sitting in a shallow river now, water barely above our ankles, but somehow our truck was upstream of us in the water, untouched and completely intact. Looking behind us, there was a cliff maybe 50 feet up, and apparently we had gone over it somehow, but the truck hadn't flipped and neither of us were hurt. Not a scratch, in fact. No broken bones, nothing. My uncle checked his phone as well, trying to get a signal, and the time said 3:10 a.m., which means we had lost over 4 hours. Also, there was no signal anywhere. We decided to walk upstream against the current, and it took us almost an hour before we found lights from a small cluster of village homes nearby. One family let us stay the night without asking questions, seeing how shaken that we were. Morning came and my cousin's dad called for help. A small group of men with a tow truck showed up, and when we got back to the river in daylight, the pickup was still in the exact spot that it had been, as if somebody had placed it just sort of gently in the water there. It took a while and 10 or 15 men to get it hooked up and dragged out, but eventually we got it out, and before leaving, an elder in the village came up to my cousin's dad, looked at us, then at the path that we had walked, and said, "You went upstream. If you hadn't, the river would have carried you straight to the old cemetery and the hospital morgue, you know." I still don't understand what happened that night. That shadow in the fog, the truck surviving a cliff drop like that, without even a scratch on it, all the lost hours that we experienced, and the fact that we were completely unharmed. None of it makes any sense, but I know that I'm alive, and I'll never forget the way that the forest and whatever was in it felt like it was watching us, like it wanted to make sure that we didn't reach the other side. That night, it still haunts me every time that I see fog or drive down a narrow dark road now, and I'll never forget it. This was back in 2003 when I was stationed at a training base in Southeast Asia. I didn't know it at the time, but the camp had a reputation for strange occurrences. I have a few experiences there as well, and I'll start with the one that stuck out to me the most. So when I first arrived, I was supposed to start a vocational course, but due to some health issues, I hadn't been cleared for full duty yet. So I ended up doing temporary work in the personal office, basically just sitting around until my course spot opened. That's how I ended up running errands for other soldiers. One night I was told to go with a new guy as well. His name was Min. It was to pick up some folding tables from the kitchen area, and the kitchen was on the ground floor of a big building, and above it was a functional hall used for training events. At the back of the hall, there was a small office for the kitchen staff as well, including the cook and one of the assistants. You could only get to it through the main hall, which had these heavy folding doors all around it. So Min and I go into the office, and the assistant isn't there. Since we had nothing else to do, we just sort of leaned against some furniture, talking quietly, officially waiting for him to show up. And that's when I noticed that the double doors at the back of the hall were moving. They weren't swinging freely or anything, but they were closing slowly, steadily, like somebody was pulling them shut from the outside. It was dead still that night, mind you, and the windows were closed. Nothing could have really caused them to move like that. Min and I both froze upon seeing it and just sort of stared. But then it got worse. When the doors were a few inches from being fully closed, they stopped. And for a few seconds nothing happened, but then they slammed shut with a loud echoing bang, like someone had suddenly thrown their entire body weight into it. Now, I don't really scare easily, but that was really unnerving. I sort of laughed awkwardly and said something like, "Guess we'll just go back before the chief notices that we've been gone too long." Min asked me if it was one of those things, and all I could say was, "Yeah, that's exactly one of those things." When we turned to the personal office, though, the chief asked if we were okay, and I guess we both looked a little bit shaken, and didn't really explain what happened. Now, that's just one of the stories from that base, but there were more nights when things like footsteps and voices or doors moving on their own happened, and nothing ever physically hurt anyone, but it made you feel like you weren't alone for sure, even when the camp was completely empty, or mostly empty anyway. I'll probably share some more stories another time, but this is the one that really sticks with me because it was the first time that I realized something about that place wasn't really normal, and also a time when somebody else was there to witness it too. We were both pretty freaked out by it, and that says something about the fact that the event was not normal or really explainable in a way that made sense. This happened when I was about 19 years old, during my first year living away from home actually. I don't think that I've ever actually written this down before, but lately I've been listening to a ton of really creepy encounters, and it reminded me just how messed up this actually was. So, I was studying in a major city at the time and renting one of those cheap student share houses. If you've ever seen them, then you know the type. Old place chopped up into as many bedrooms as possible to cram students in. My room, it used to be the old living room, which meant two things. One, it was right at the front of the house, and two, the front door was literally about 2 meters from my bed. There wasn't ever a proper front yard to this place, just a sort of small concrete step and then straight onto the footpath. So if anyone did stand at the door, they were basically standing right next to my window. At first, it certainly felt weird too, but after a few months I think that I just sort of got used to it. You start recognizing sounds like people walking past versus someone actually stopping at your door. Anyway, one weekend, both my housemates went away. That almost never happened at that same time, so I was alone in the house for about 2 nights. The first night was fine too, nothing unusual, but the second night is when this happened. It was around 12:30 or maybe closer to 1 in the morning, and I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone, not even tired yet, when I heard footsteps slow down outside. Not just someone walking past, that very specific sound of someone stopping right in front of the door. I froze for a second and listened. Then I heard the door handle move. Not aggressively, but just slowly turning back and forth like someone was testing it. At that point, my heart started going nuts. I told myself that maybe it was just a drunk person at the wrong house or something, but then it kept going, like they were patiently checking if it might suddenly unlock. I decided to look outside because I wanted to confirm that it wasn't someone who actually lived there, or maybe even a neighbor or something. So I got up quietly and moved the curtain just a tiny bit. And the second that I did that, I realized something was wrong immediately, because whoever was outside was already right there at the window, not standing back and not looking around. He was literally pressed up against the glass, face inches from where mine was. It was like we locked eyes instantly too. I didn't scream, I honestly couldn't. It was like my brain just sort of stalled. I just remember feeling this weird drop in my stomach, like all the adrenaline sort of hit at once. He was wearing a dark hoodie and I couldn't see his face fully or clearly, but I could see his eyes staring directly into mine. And the second that he realized that I could see him, he bolted, just turned and ran straight down the street. I stood there frozen for maybe 10 seconds before I even moved again. Then I called my friend first because my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely type. She told me to call the police immediately, which I did. They showed up about 20 minutes later and they took a statement, checked around the street, but obviously the guy was long gone. And so there really wasn't much that they could do. There were no cameras, no clear description, nothing stolen, and no forced entry. They basically said that it was likely somebody checking houses to see which ones were empty, but the part that still freaks me out is this. So my bedroom light was on the whole time, which means that he absolutely knew that someone was inside. He didn't think the house was empty is what I'm getting at. He knew that someone was there. After that, I barely slept the entire weekend. Every small noise sounded like somebody at the door again. I kept replaying the moment in my head, how close he was, how long he must have been standing there watching before I even noticed, and honestly, the worst part wasn't the door handle or the idea of a break-in even. It was the split second when I moved the curtain and realized that he was already waiting at that window, like he was expecting me to look. Even now, years later, I still hate opening curtains at night. I always check from the side first, in fact. And I know that that sounds paranoid, but once you've seen someone standing that close in the dark, you never fully forget it. So this happened when I was in my early teens, maybe around 13. My mum had just moved into a small farming town after separating from my dad, and the place that we moved into wasn't some creepy abandoned property or anything like that. It was just old and cheap, really, which is why she could afford it. The land had one normal house and then this sort of separate concrete shed structure at the back too. It wasn't a barn exactly, but more like a storage building that had been repurposed a bunch of times over the decades. At some point, it had been used to keep animals, I think, and later it was just used for junk or storage. When we moved in, though, the whole property needed work and the shed floor was uneven dirt, so my mum's partner decided to dig it out and pour a proper concrete slab there. I remember being out there when they started because there wasn't much else to do in that town. At first, it was just sort of normal digging too. Rocks, bits of scrap metal, old nails, broken glass, typical stuff that you'd expect to be buried around an old property like this. But then they hit something that looked like a large bone. Not shocking at all, honestly, at first. It was clearly from an animal, probably livestock. There were actually several pieces like that scattered around, which made sense given the place used to be for farming and whatnot. But the weird part? That came later when they dug deeper near one corner. My stepdad uncovered something curved and smooth that didn't look like any animal bone that we'd seen. He picked it up, wiped the dirt off, and immediately went quiet, because it was a part of a human skull, specifically the upper back section. Not complete, just a chunk of it, but there was no mistaking what it was. I personally didn't understand at first until my mum told me to go back inside, and that's when I realized that this whole situation was something serious. She ended up calling the police because she didn't want to take any chances. A couple of officers showed up along with someone from the local medical office, and they looked at it for maybe 10 minutes total. One of them even said that it looked old and weathered, not something recent. What really stood out, though, was just how quickly they lost interest. They basically concluded that it wasn't tied to any case and said that it was probably decades old, could have been from medical use, could have been from a burial site that got disturbed at some point. They threw out multiple possibilities, but they never really committed to anything. And then, just like that, they left. They didn't take the bone, didn't open an investigation, nothing. After that, though, my mum tried to figure out if there was any explanation by asking neighbors about the history of the property. That's when we learned something that made the situation a whole lot more unsettling. So apparently, before we moved in, the shed had been used years earlier by a guy who ran a pest control and animal disposal business. According to the locals, he would sometimes bury animal carcasses on the property temporarily before transporting them away or something. People also said that he wasn't exactly known for following regulations, and the theory that made the most sense was that the skull fragment may have come from a medical waste or illegally obtained remains that were disposed of improperly along with animal remains. Basically, not some hidden crime scene, just extremely irresponsible handling of biological material decades earlier. But still, that explanation didn't really make it less disturbing. What stuck with me too wasn't just finding the skull piece, it was realizing just how easily something like that could end up buried somewhere random and just sort of forgotten like that. Even now, years later, I think about it sometimes when I see construction crews digging up land, because you never really know what's sitting underground until someone happens to just hit it with a shovel like that. This happened a couple of years back now, and I don't really tell this much because, honestly, most of it just makes me look like an idiot who didn't know how to say no, but it still sticks with me because of just how weird it got toward the end. So, I decided to take a solo day trip to a big theme park. It was one of those last weekends before they shut down for the season sort of thing, and I figured that it would be quiet enough to just sort of walk around, ride some stuff, and keep to myself. That was the whole point too. I like doing things alone sometimes. No planning, no coordinating with anyone, just me. Everything was normal at first too. I got there mid-afternoon, parked, went through into one of the longer coaster lines, and after maybe 10 minutes, a guy standing ahead of me started talking to me. At first, it was just sort of normal small talk about the ride, wait times, whatever. But then he shifted into asking more personal stuff pretty quickly, like where I lived, what I did for work, if I came alone often. Nothing super alarming individually, but it was non-stop questions and he wasn't really answering much about himself. At that point, I should have just kept responses vague, but I didn't. I gave general answers, nothing specific, but enough that he knew that I was from out of town and there by myself. Well, after the ride, he immediately asked if we could just go around together for a bit. I told him no politely, said that I planned to just do some of my own thing, and he really didn't accept that at all. He kept pushing in this really awkward way, like he'd act hurt and say people always ditch him, that nobody ever sticks around, and it turned into this sort of weird guilt thing instead of a normal conversation. Eventually, I agreed to one more ride, just to end the situation without making a scene. That was my first mistake, though. While we waited in the next line, he kept escalating the personal questions. Stuff like whether I lived alone, what my daily routine looked like, how often I went out at night. It didn't feel like casual curiosity anymore, too. It felt more like he was trying to build a bit of a profile or something. I started giving shorter and more vague answers after that, and when we got off that ride, I told him again that I was leaving to go and do other stuff. Same reaction, though. He immediately went back to acting upset, saying that I was abandoning him and asking what he did wrong. At this point, I wasn't just uncomfortable too. I was starting to feel stuck. It's hard to explain, but he wasn't acting aggressive, just sort of persistent in a way that made it feel like if I pushed too hard that this whole thing might escalate. So instead of cutting it off properly, I kept compromising. One more ride turned into another, and each time he'd promise that it was the last and then restart the same conversation. By early evening, I was exhausted and just wanted to get away from him. That's when things shifted from awkward to actually unsettling too. While we were walking toward the front of the park, he suddenly started talking about how he sometimes watched people from a distance. He described sitting in his car outside of people's houses, just observing them. He said it so casually too, like he thought that it was normal behavior. I asked if he meant neighbors or maybe friends or something, and he just shrugged and said something like, whoever I'm interested in at the time. That was the moment that I realized, too, that I needed to get out immediately. I stopped engaging, told him clearly that I was leaving, and started walking toward the exit without waiting for a response. He didn't argue this time, too. He just stood there watching me. I remember looking back once and seeing that he hadn't moved. He was just sort of standing still in the crowd, staring directly at me. I didn't run, but I walked fast the entire way to the parking lot. I kept checking behind me because I genuinely thought that he might follow me. And when I got to my car, I locked the doors immediately and just sat there for a minute trying to calm myself down. It sort of hit me all at once, though, how much personal information I'd casually given a total stranger earlier in the day like that. Thankfully, nothing ever really came of it. He never contacted me, never showed up anywhere, nothing like that, but for weeks afterward I was so paranoid any time that I saw a smaller car near my apartment or noticed someone lingering nearby. Looking back now, I know that it was stupid of me to do this, but it's hard to explain how you sort of justify things in your head at the time that things go down like this. But it certainly taught me, pretty bluntly too, that being polite to strangers has its limits. And once someone starts ignoring boundaries, it's not rude to walk away immediately. In fact, it's necessary. Alright, so this is still pretty recent, and I'm honestly still trying to figure out how to process it, because it escalated way past what I thought was just awkward ex-behavior. For context, I'm a uni student, and about a year and a half ago, I dated someone from my course for a few months. The breakup itself wasn't dramatic. She basically told me that she'd been questioning things and realized that she wasn't actually into women long term. It sucked at the time, but it wasn't a fight or anything. We just sort of stopped talking and we moved on. After that, though, we barely crossed paths, and we had originally shared one lecture, but she stopped attending pretty early in the semester. I assume that she either dropped it or maybe switched to an online one like a lot of people do. But then, around last autumn, she started randomly appearing in classes that she was never enrolled in. At first, it didn't even register as creepy because, well, uni buildings are open and people sometimes sit in on the lectures. But the pattern was what got really weird. She only ever showed up in rooms where I had classes, and she would sit somewhere in the back and just sort of watch quietly. She never spoke to me, never approached me, nothing. I tried to rationalize it for a while. I figured that maybe she just liked the subject or had friends in those classes or something. But the thing is that she never attended any of her actual registered courses anymore, just mine. Then it moved beyond campus. I work part-time at a small grocery store 3 days a week, always the same shifts. One of my co-workers casually asked me one night if I knew that girl who keeps coming in to stare at you. That's when it clicked that she only ever came in when I was working. He said that she never bought much and sometimes just grabbed one cheap item and then lingered around the aisles watching the checkout area. I still didn't confront her though. Honestly, I just sort of hoped that she would lose interest. But this went on for about 2 months. And then the part that actually scared me happened. So I live in a small apartment building with a hallway camera connected to my phone, and one night at around 3:45 in the morning, I got a motion alert. At first I thought it was someone just sort of coming home late, but when I checked the footage, she was standing directly in front of my door, not knocking, not moving, just standing there looking straight into the camera lens. She wasn't dressed normal either. Just a t-shirt and shorts, no shoes, almost like she just walked out of her place in the middle of the night or something. I froze when I saw it. It didn't feel like a normal ex being weird situation anymore. It felt unpredictable and stalkerish. I woke up my current partner because I wasn't going to open the door myself. I went to the door and told her, though, that she needed to leave and that we would call the police if she didn't. She didn't respond verbally at all, too. According to my partner, she just sort of stood there silently for a few seconds, and then started laughing quietly. Not loud and not hysterical, but just this sort of low, steady laugh. That's when we actually called the emergency services, and by the time that the officers arrived, she was gone. They checked the building and the surrounding area, but they couldn't find her, and we did show them the footage and they took a report, but because she hadn't really forced entry or threatened us directly or anything, there really wasn't much that they could immediately do besides log it. But the next part is what actually made it sink into just how unstable the situation really was. So the following day, campus security contacted me, because apparently she'd been reported multiple times by other students for sitting in random classes without permission and refusing to leave when asked. They ended up suspending her pending a mental health evaluation, and I haven't seen her since then. That was several months ago, and nothing violent ever happened, I suppose, but I don't know. It wasn't dramatic, and it was how quiet and persistent the whole thing was that really got under my skin. There was no confrontation, no messages, and no yelling. Just this slow pattern of showing up everywhere in my routine and then eventually standing outside of my door in the middle of the night without even saying a word. How weird is that, right? Even now, I still get tense when my camera sends a late night alert like that. It's not that I think that she's coming back, it's more that it made me realize just how easily someone can track your daily habits like that if they decide to focus on you long enough. Anyway, hopefully this is the end of it, but somehow I don't think that it is. So this happened last winter when I was traveling for work. I was in a mid-sized city, staying at a pretty average business hotel for about a week. Nothing fancy, nothing sketchy either. The area was one of those places where it's quiet at night, but not dangerous by any means. Like, you'll still see people walking dogs or grabbing food after dark here. About 2 blocks from the hotel, there was a small late-night bakery cafe that stayed open until around 10 or 11. I ended up staying there almost every evening because it was close and I hated eating alone in the hotel rooms. Usually I would go before it got dark, but one night I got stuck finishing a work report and didn't head out until maybe about 9:30. The walk there was normal, just a slightly uphill sidewalk with a few streetlights that were spaced way too far apart. Some parts were bright, but then you'd hit a sort of stretch where it was almost completely dark. I grabbed a drink and a sandwich, stayed about 20 minutes, and then eventually I headed back. By the time that I left the cafe, there weren't many people out anymore. The street was basically empty, and as I was getting close to the hotel, there's this sort of side area near the parking lot where they kept big industrial dumpsters. That section had zero lighting, like it was just a black patch between 2 working streetlights, and right when I got to about level with it, someone stepped out from that dark area. It was a guy, maybe late 40s or 50s, wearing a long coat that looked dirty and way too heavy for the weather. He didn't rush me or anything, he just sort of walked straight toward me at a normal pace, and I immediately felt the internal alarms going off. The ones where you know that something isn't right, even if nothing technically threatening had happened yet. Then I noticed that he was holding something in both hands. At first, I thought it was a bag, but when he got closer, I realized that it was a chunk of concrete or stone or something. Not huge, but definitely big enough to do some serious damage. He stopped about maybe 3 or 4 meters away from me and held it up slightly like he was showing it to me. Then he said, very calmly, "Can you tell me something? Does this look valuable to you?" I didn't answer at first. I was trying to process what he even meant. He took a step closer and repeated it, like he was genuinely asking for an opinion. "I think there might be metal inside. Do you think it's worth something?" At that point, my brain finally kicked into survival mode. The hotel entrance was maybe 30 seconds uphill from where I was standing, and I realized that if he swung that thing, there was no way that I would react fast enough. Now, instead of running immediately, I did something that I always do when I get a bit scared. I got blunt and loud. I just said, "No, I don't know. I don't care. Leave me alone." He paused like he didn't expect that reaction. Then he tried again, stepping slightly sideways like he was trying to block the path. "You don't want to look closer? There could be something important." That's when it really clicked that this wasn't about a rock. It felt like he was trying to get me to move closer into that dark area. I cut him off again, louder this time. "No, move." We stared at each other for a few seconds that honestly felt way longer than it was. He didn't raise the rock, didn't yell, didn't threaten. He just stood there, staring at me with this really weird blank expression. Then he slowly stepped backward toward the dumpsters and kind of blended back into the dark area. I didn't wait to see what he did next. The second that he moved away, I walked fast uphill to the hotel entrance, then basically jogged the last stretch. Once I got inside, I realized that my hands were actually shaking pretty badly. I told the front desk what had happened, and they said that they had issues before with someone hanging around the parking lot, asking strange questions to guests, but he usually left when he was confronted, although he had attacked some people. Thankfully, nothing else happened after that, and I never did see him again during the rest of my stay. It was weird though, just how calm and, well, casual he was about the whole thing. Like, he was trying to act nonchalant, and he was trying to get me to step closer to where there were no lights and no cameras. That much I'm certain of. Which really begs the question, right? What would have happened if it was someone else who wasn't as blunt as I was? This happened when I was a kid in a small town in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where every street just sort of ends in the woods. I lived with my grandparents and my two siblings in this big old house that honestly should have been torn down years before we moved in. It had 3 levels plus a basement, and everything inside creaked constantly. I didn't start out thinking anything paranormal was going on. It was more that the place just sort of never really felt normal. Stuff would be in a slightly different spot, doors wouldn't stay shut, and at night you'd hear movement even when everyone was accounted for. As a kid, you kind of just accept it because, well, adults say old house and you don't have anything else to compare it to. The specific thing that I still remember clearly, though, happened one summer night. I was supposed to be asleep that night, but I wasn't tired, so I snuck downstairs to use the family computer in the kitchen. It was one of those bulky desktop setups that took forever to boot up, so you would just sit there sort of staring at the screen while it made its noise. The kitchen layout matters too because of what happened, so the computer sort of sat between 2 open doorways. One went into the dining room, the other led into a laundry area that connected directly to the basement stairs. There was technically a door between the kitchen and the laundry room, but it was never latched. It would just sort of drift open on its own, so it was basically always sitting half open. Now that night, all of the lights in the house were off except for the glow from the computer monitor, and I remember being focused on some basic game, volume low so I wouldn't get caught. And after a while, I got this strong feeling that somebody was standing behind me. Not like a vague I'm nervous thing, but more like the very specific awareness that you get when somebody is physically close to your back. I assumed it was my granddad coming to tell me to go to bed, so I froze, waiting for him to say something. But instead, I heard slow movement from the laundry room area. It sounded like careful footsteps, not normal walking, more like someone trying not to make a noise. I still didn't turn around. I don't know why, but I just sort of sat there, staring at the screen. The sound got closer until it was basically right next to the chair, and then right next to my ear, clear as anything, I heard my name whispered. Not loud, not dramatic, but just very close and very calm. As you can probably imagine, I bolted immediately, knocked the chair over, ran through the dining room up the stairs, straight into the bedroom that my sister and I shared, and I didn't look back at any point. I remember not doing this because I was afraid of seeing something than anything else. What makes it stick with me, though, is that nobody in the house admitted to being awake after I asked them. My grandparents were both heavy sleepers at the time and would have had to have crossed the kitchen in plain sight to get behind me, and my siblings, they were upstairs the whole time. Years later, we moved out after my grandmother's health started getting weird while we were living there. She had these sort of constant unexplained bruises and would randomly have episodes where she was losing blood internally, but doctors never really found a cause for it all. After we left that house, though, those problems just stopped happening. No treatment change, nothing. It literally just disappeared. And well, the house itself eventually got condemned because of structural issues, but my grandmother still ended up buying the property after that, which I always thought was really strange, given how much she struggled there, but hey, whatever. I don't claim anything supernatural really happened there. Realistically, it probably was just somebody in the house messing with me or some kind of auditory thing that kids experience when they're sort of half tired like that, but I'm in my 30s now and I've never once had another moment where I heard someone speak directly into my ear like that, when, as far as I know, nobody was there. And really, it's that part that I still don't have an explanation for, and what bothers me the most. So this goes way back to when I was in middle school, around 13, and I was fully deep into the whole paranormal hobby phase. My girlfriend at the time was really into modern witchcraft stuff too, and she got me hooked into Ouija boards. We were using one almost every day for weeks, in fact. At first, it was sort of just silly. We'd ask who's there, and it would always respond with the same thing, the Guardian. I'll admit that it freaked me out a little bit, but I didn't take it too seriously. But then it started swearing at us and telling us to get lost or worse. One day too, I got frustrated and sort of flipped the board off the table. I stopped playing for a bit after that too, thinking that that was the end of it. But let me tell you, it wasn't. You see, a few weeks later, I was working an evening shift at a Target near my house, stacking shelves, when out of nowhere, I heard my name whispered. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, but then it happened again, louder, and I checked the aisle next to me, but nobody was there. The third time, I yelled, "Who's calling me?" but there was still nothing. Then a coworker walked up, looked freaked out. She said that she had heard my name too and claimed that she could sense spirits, and apparently it was warning me about someone in my family. I didn't believe her fully, but it freaked me out enough to pay attention. She even said something about negative energy following you whenever I talked about my plans, and I realized that it was connected to the Ouija board experience for sure. So I went home that night pretty uneasy. Later that same evening, my mum called from the kitchen phone and told me that a distant relative had apparently died unexpectedly. That confirmed the feeling too that I had at work, and that's when I started taking the whole thing more seriously. The next day, I invited my girlfriend and my best friend over to my parents' basement to try and communicate more with whatever it was. We were alone and had been playing for maybe 20 minutes when all three of us smelled breakfast sausage cooking. Totally out of place, mind you. When we asked the board, it spelled out yes. That was enough to push us to keep experimenting, and we started asking it to prove itself physically, moving objects, sensing cold spots, and eventually I asked if it could affect my girlfriend directly. The planchette moved faster than I'd ever seen it before. Then it started a countdown. 3, 2, 1, and then the basement lights flickered and went out completely. I ran upstairs screaming. My friend was still stumbling in the dark, and a few seconds later, the street transformer blew and the whole neighborhood went dark. Timing was too exact for me to feel like it was just coincidence, but my girlfriend came upstairs calmly, acting like nothing had happened, but she muttered in a deep voice, something that sounded nothing like her own, and I asked what she said, and she just shrugged, acting normal. We told her to go home at that point, and she walked back down the street like nothing had happened. For weeks after that too, my friend and I slept with the lights on, and I honestly ran away from the house that night for a few hours because I just couldn't handle it. My parents told me that it was probably just a transformer and some wiring issues or whatever. Years later though, at a family event, they admitted that they had just said that to calm me down, and there wasn't any wind or external cause that night that really could have explained it. And even now, when I think back on it, the timing of the lights, the smells, the voices, it all still freaks me out. I don't play with Ouija boards anymore, and I don't even joke about it. Whatever we encountered, it was real enough to me to scare the heck out of me at 13 years old, and I don't think that I'll ever forget it. This is going to sound a bit wild, I know that, but our house in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, has a reputation for being haunted, and honestly, people avoid staying over. I've lived here my whole life, and I'm the youngest of 5, but my mum and I have had the most intense experiences of all of us. Whatever's in the house seems to pick on us too when we're alone. I'll lay out some of the more concrete stuff so that you can see what I mean. So, my mum has a few that she always talks about. 2 years ago, when she was finishing her degree, she was home most days doing some schoolwork, and one afternoon she went to grab a snack and came back to her office to see all of her papers floating for a second before falling to the floor. Now, they were near the edges of the desk, so there's no way that they just sort of slipped off and were sort of making their way to the floor. She is adamant that they were floating in place. Another reoccurring thing for her is what she calls the shadow. She says that she can see a dark figure moving through the house when she's alone sometimes, almost like it's following her. My sisters have had their moments too. Like my oldest, woke up from a dream about doing an exorcism with 3 long scratches on her back that were not there before bed. My second sister was alone in her basement room when something hit her in the head. She found one of her toys tangled in her hair, and there was no explanation as to how it got there since she hadn't thrown it or leaned back or anything. For me personally, a couple of things stick out. Like just last Thursday night, I was in my basement room. My sister and I have connecting rooms separated by a curtain, and I was getting ready for bed when I started hearing breathing right outside of my door. It seriously sent chills down my spine, and the fan in my room barely makes any noise, and this did not sound like that. It felt like somebody was watching me, in fact. Another incident happened on New Year's Day when I was asleep at around 3:40 in the morning when my phone rang from an unknown caller. I let it ring, and after 4 in the morning, I finally fell back to sleep, but when I checked my phone around 9 in the morning, it still said unknown caller, and it had only rung once. Now, for a call to bypass Do Not Disturb on phones, it usually has to ring twice, but this one went through with a single ring. I don't know if it was a glitch, but it felt like something wanted to wake me up and like something was testing me. There are more things that I could share, but even these few examples make it obvious that something in the house notices us and picks moments to remind us that it's there. It's certainly subtle and quiet, and well, because of that, it's really unsettling too. That's the scariest part too, for sure. It's knowing that someone or something is watching when you're alone and that you can't do anything about it. So this is one of those situations where I don't even really believe in anything paranormal, but over the years I've lived with enough people now who swear that they've seen some weird stuff that it's hard to just brush it off completely. This all started when I was in my early 20s, living in a rental house. It wasn't old or creepy looking or anything, just a normal brick place in a quiet suburb. But for some reason, every single person who stayed there more than a night or two eventually had some kind of strange experience, especially if they were alone. The first time that I realized that it wasn't just people being dramatic was when I stayed over at my ex's parents' place years earlier. We'd only been dating a few months at that point. It was supposed to be a normal meet-the-family sort of weekend. Dinner, small talk, all that, nothing weird. The next morning, though, we're at the table eating breakfast, and his older sister suddenly starts talking about how she got up at around 2 a.m. because her kid was crying. She said that when she walked into the kitchen as well, that she saw something blocking the doorway to the lounge where we were sleeping. She described it as a short shape with something sticking out from its sides, like it was sort of hunched and wide. She thought that it was a person at first, but then quickly realized that it was way too small. The entire family immediately went into full panic mode. They were super religious and started praying right there in the kitchen. Meanwhile, I'm sort of sitting there trying to act normal because I didn't want to look insane, but internally I was like, okay, that's weirdly specific. Later that day, I went for a walk by myself and mostly just tried to clear my head a bit. But here's the thing. At that point in my life, I already had this long history of people around me claiming that they saw small shapes near me. I never saw anything clearly myself, but enough different people described similar stuff that it stuck in my mind. I figured at the time, though, that the sister probably just saw a shadow from something outside, or maybe her eyes were just playing tricks on her. That would have been the logical explanation anyway. But after we moved into this house, similar things kept happening with totally unrelated people. Roommates would say that they'd see something small dart across hallways when they were up late, or not like a pet or anything too, but more like a quick shadow that moved way too quickly, always low to the ground and always out of the corner of their eye. One of my housemate's partners once got up at like 5 in the morning to make coffee before work and swore that he saw something sitting on the balcony railing. He described it as being about the size of a cat but shaped wrong, like it was upright instead of on all fours. He turned the light on, but by that time it was gone. Again, I never saw anything clearly myself, but what I did experience was more sort of indirect stuff, I guess you could say. Like hearing light footsteps when I knew that everybody was asleep, or objects being slightly out of place in the morning when no one admitted moving them. Stuff that could absolutely have normal explanations, but it happened often enough to feel, well, at least a little bit off. The most consistent reports, though, always came from people who stayed up really late, insomniacs basically. They'd say that they saw quick shapes moving along walls or down the hallway towards the bathroom area, never coming toward them directly and just moving like they were trying not to be noticed. My partner now has mentioned it too, and he works night shifts, so he's usually awake when I'm asleep, and he says sometimes when he's in the living room late at night that he'll catch something low to the ground moving past the hallway entrance. He described it more than once as looking like somebody crouched extremely low and moving quickly. I've tried staying up late personally to see it myself, but, well, I just never have. And I also crash early a lot of the time, and honestly, part of me just doesn't really want to see anything clearly. Over time, too, we started treating it less like something supernatural and just more like something weird or an environmental thing, I guess. Like streetlights hitting windows at certain angles or sleep deprivation making people misinterpret movement. What really still gets me, though, is just how consistent the descriptions are. Different people, years apart, no connection to each other, all describing basically the same type of movement. Nothing has ever touched anyone or done anything aggressive. It's more like something just sort of passing through, maybe, or like it doesn't care about us at all and it's just sort of there. Well, these days I don't really think of it as scary in the dramatic sense, I guess you could say. It's more just sort of unsettling in a quiet way. And so, at this point, we mostly just sort of ignore it. The people who see it say that it's the best way to handle it anyway, because the few times that someone tried to stare directly or to go and check it out, it just disappeared instantly. So yeah, I don't know what it is, but there's definitely something there, and it's probably something boring and explainable, but I'll say this. Every place that I've lived where people reported this stuff had one thing in common. It only ever happened when someone was alone and tired, and always stayed just out of clear sight. So I'm not really someone who goes looking for creepy stuff, but I do like checking out abandoned places just out of curiosity. Nothing extreme, but just sort of a casual, sort of usual walk-around look at old buildings, and then I just leave. That's how this whole thing started, in fact. And honestly, if I had known more about the area beforehand, I probably wouldn't have gone at all. So this happened last summer, just outside of a small town that I live nearby. There's an old training facility out there that shut down decades ago, Most of it is fenced off, but there are still open sections where people hike or mess around or whatever. It looks normal during the day as well, just sort of empty roads and overgrown concrete. At night it was just me, my girlfriend, and my 2 friends from work. We weren't even planning a full explore, to be honest. We just wanted to sort of walk around for maybe an hour or so because it was cooler out. And at first, everything felt normal. You hear the usual stuff in places like that: insects, branches snapping, animals moving in the brush. There are woods on both sides of the old service road after all, so we assumed most of the noises were just wildlife. One thing that we did notice earlier on, though, was that animals kept crossing the road ahead of us. Not unusual by itself, but it kept happening in like short intervals. First a couple of raccoons, then something like a rabbit, then later what looked like a fox. They all moved quickly as well and didn't react to us at all, which felt a little bit off. Anyway, about 20 minutes in, we stopped near an old family cemetery that sits back on the road there. It's tiny as well, like maybe a dozen headstones, mostly really worn down as well. And while we were standing there talking, we heard a sharp whistle from somewhere off to our right. It sounded human as well, not like wind and not like a bird, just a quick, clean whistle. We figured that it was probably somebody else out there messing with us. People do dumb stuff in those places at night. So we checked around a nearby abandoned structure, but there was no one inside and no sign anyone had been there recently. So we brushed it off and we just kept walking. The weird part started, though, when we turned around to head back toward the parking area. Almost immediately after we started back, we heard coyotes howling somewhere behind us. At first, it sounded normal too. You could tell that it was a group. But then it really spread out, and we started hearing the same howls from both sides of the road at the same time, like multiple groups had surrounded the area suddenly. The sounds got louder quickly too, and it didn't sound like normal howling anymore. It sort of shifted into this mix of yipping and low growling that felt way too close. It got so loud, in fact, that we had to raise our voices to hear each other, even though we were standing shoulder to shoulder. We all sort of froze for a bit because it genuinely sounded like they were moving with us. Every time that we took a few steps, the noise adjusted position, staying just inside of the tree line. At that point, nobody was joking anymore too. We stayed closer together and just sort of kept moving steadily back toward the road entrance. The noises, they didn't stop too, but they did get quieter once we started leaving the deeper section. And then, something else happened that still sticks with me. From ahead of us, somewhere low to the ground, we heard what sounded like an owl hoot, except it just didn't sound right. It was deeper and kind of rough, like someone trying to imitate an owl instead of an actual bird. And right after that, everything went completely silent. I mean, no insects, no movement in the trees, not even a breeze, nothing, just completely dead. We walked the rest of the way back without talking much, and everyone was tense but trying to act normal. About halfway back, I thought that I saw something near the edge of the road too. It looked like a person crouched down low, but the proportions seemed all wrong. The arms looked too long compared to the torso, and it wasn't moving and just sort of staying low near the ground there. I assumed it was a fallen branch or some kind of a stump, but one of my friends slowed down at the exact same spot and glanced in the same direction, so I don't think that I was the only one who noticed something. We didn't stop to check though, we just kept walking, and that was weird. Once we got back to the car though, we thought that the weird part was over, but on the drive out, something else happened that freaked everyone out more than anything else. So, as we were heading out, a deer ran out onto the road in front of us, which isn't unusual out there, but instead of bolting when the headlight hit it, it just sort of stood there for a second, and then slowly walked off the road into the ditch. But the way that it moved looked so stiff and almost mechanical, like it wasn't reacting normally. Also, I swear that its eyes were not normal. It seemed to me like its eyes were, well, almost human-like. A few minutes later, our windshield suddenly fogged up completely as well, not gradually. It happened within like seconds. The air outside wasn't humid and the AC was running, so that made no sense. But we had to drive slowly for several minutes until it eventually cleared on its own, and thankfully, after that, we were in the clear and nothing else happened. We made it home fine, which I was very thankful for, but we all talked about it afterward and tried to come up with logical explanations. And while some of it could be a combination of animals behaving really unpredictably, stress too, and being in a dark and unfamiliar place like that, the part that still really bothers me is just how coordinated everything felt. The sounds moving with us, the silence hitting all at once, and multiple people noticing the same shapes in the same spots without saying anything at the time. None of us have gone back out there since then, and none of us intend to either, because whatever the heck that was, it almost seemed like it didn't want us there and was chasing us out. So this started happening a few weeks ago, and it's honestly freaking me out more than I even want to admit. I live in a rural area in northern Kentucky, near a small state forest, and my backyard basically borders the woods, and there's no street lighting anywhere close by. The only light comes from our dim porch bulb, which barely covers the patio. I let my 2 dogs out every night before bed, and lately, I've been standing outside with them to make sure that raccoons, skunks, or coyotes don't wander too close. But for the past few nights, whenever I'm out there, I hear this slow, deliberate whistling coming from somewhere just past the fence line. It's a weird sort of minor tune, almost like somebody is testing a song but never really finishing it. Definitely human, but no footsteps or rustling in the leaves and nothing to explain it. All the neighboring houses are dark, so I cannot attribute it to someone just being outside. The whistling, it lasts maybe 8 to 10 seconds, but feels a bit longer than that. But the moment that my dogs start barking, it stops, and there's this silence that just feels really wrong. It's not the usual night sounds. It's like no wind in the trees, no traffic from the highway for like a mile away, and just nothing at all. Just this dead quiet that makes me back up toward the door without looking away from the fence. My dogs, they will only leave if I promise them high-value treats like chicken or whatever, but once inside I lock up and draw the blinds, but they'll continue barking at the back window like something is still out there. And when I look, there's nothing, just the dark, empty yard. The part, though, that really shook me happened last night. I went out a bit farther toward the edge of the woods with a flashlight, thinking that maybe I could catch a glimpse of whatever it was that was out there. I saw something, too, that froze me in place. It was absolutely huge. A dark humanoid shape, at least 7 feet tall, hunched over slightly. Its limbs were long, almost exaggerated, and the way that it moved reminded me of how a large animal slinks through underbrush, smooth and silent and deliberate. I could see it partially through the trees, though, mostly a massive shadow form, but it seemed to be aware of me because the instant that I locked my eyes on it, I felt like it paused, then sort of just melted back into the blackness. My dogs, though, went absolutely ballistic, barking and growling, and the whistling started again, faint and almost mocking-like. I didn't hang around, though, to figure out what else that was, because I went into an absolute panic. I tried to figure out what it might be, too, like maybe it was a bear or something, but the proportions were all wrong. It was way too tall and too humanoid, and moved like it was testing the space, not running like a normal animal would. My dogs, they've been around other animals plenty and know what's a threat, and they were acting like this wasn't a normal animal at all. After that, too, I've been extra careful. I still let the dogs out, but I never go past the porch now. thought that maybe keeping the lights on would help, but it doesn't seem to matter. The whistling, it still happens when I step out, like it's just waiting there for me. Sometimes I think that I see the shape in the woods again, but it's always far enough that I cannot get a clear look, so I don't really know. I don't know what to do about this too. I've thought about calling someone for advice or maybe setting up a trail camera, but part of me worries that it's already aware of anything that I do. I'm sharing this here because maybe someone has experienced something similar, or can tell me at least if I'm imagining things, but I swear, whatever is out there, it's real, it's watching, and it ain't leaving. This all started long before my neighborhood existed. The land used to be a farm, and the story that I heard growing up was that the farmer's daughter died there in the 1940s. I didn't give it too much thought as a kid, but looking back, it certainly explains some of the stuff that happened there. So when I was around 9 years old, I couldn't sleep in my own room. It always felt like somebody was constantly watching me in there, and I just hated it. But most nights, I ended up on the floor in my parents' room, and one night I woke up and saw a little girl lying behind my mum. She was holding onto a sort of old-fashioned doll, and she looked exactly like a doll that we had in the basement. The girl was staring right at me, and I screamed. My mum woke up, and when we looked, she was gone. My parents just said that it was a bad dream. For years, too, I didn't see her again, but weird things started happening as I got older. Stuff would go missing, specific jewelry, clothing with sentimental value, and show up perfectly arranged in my room weeks or even months later. My parents swore that they didn't touch anything. Lights would turn on and off by themselves, TVs would switch channels with the remote across the room. For over 2 decades, no one else in my family experienced anything too. People in the neighborhood said that they'd heard a little girl laughing or footsteps when no kids were around sometimes. So I started wondering if whatever it was had latched onto me specifically. About 6 months ago, though, things ramped up. So I went home one evening and the bathroom connected to my room was locked, and I hadn't been in there and no one else had as far as I knew. I unlocked it, walked away, came back, and it was locked again. My boyfriend even saw it happen. A couple of months later, we tried to leave through the garage and the handle wouldn't budge. Both of us tried for several minutes, flipping the locks every which way that we could, and then suddenly it just sort of opened like nothing was wrong. The same thing happened with my dad a month later as well, and the locks and the handles are fine. Never had issues before that. My mum has started sending me videos of lights flickering inside of the house too. Then, last night, and this is what prompted me to share all this, something happened that really freaked her out. So she got into her car, buckled the seatbelt, and felt like someone grabbed it and pulled. She turned around, obviously, but nobody was there. It's weird too, because this started as things happening just around me, but now even other people are noticing things too. I've started thinking that maybe whatever it is attached to a person instead of just the property, and it seems like it's escalating over time and things are getting worse. I don't know if it's harmless or if it's testing boundaries to see how far it can go, but for anyone who has dealt with anything like this, is it possible for activity to attach to a person and get more intense over the years like this? Because this is getting harder to ignore, and I don't know what to do next, and so if you have any ideas as to how to get rid of all of this, I would really appreciate hearing from you. In the summer of 2006, when I was 16 years old, I was living in a small inland town in southern Italy. Most people were on the coast for vacation, so the streets were practically empty at this time. Now, I had a bit of a routine back then. Afternoons at my friend Marco's place playing video games, evenings walking to the central plaza to hang out until late, and that night we stayed out longer than we usually did, maybe until about 3:30 in the morning. No alcohol and no drugs, just talking and smoking and whatnot. When we said goodbye, I started walking home. The town was quiet, streetlights casting long shadows, nothing unusual. But then, at a narrow intersection, I saw someone walking toward me. They were wearing a deep green cloak with a hood, dragging one leg slightly. At first, I thought that it was just a weird costume, like someone playing a prank. But then I looked at their face, and that was when I noticed that there wasn't one. It was just black emptiness where a head should have been. I froze for a second, then panicked and I sped up. I kept looking back, expecting them to follow, but they didn't. My heart was pounding 1,000,000 miles an hour, adrenaline coursing through my veins, but halfway down the street I heard it. Not a sound in the air, but a voice in my head, calling my nickname, Luca. My friends always called me that, and the voice was low, persistent, repeating every few seconds. It didn't have a tone that I could identify, male, female, or otherwise, but it felt like it was directing me somewhere, showing a path that I didn't want to take, like ripples in water marking a trail. The street was to the right, and the voice wanted me to keep going straight. Fear made me turn anyway, and the voice called one last time as I took the turn. I eventually made it home and went to bed, but the experiences, they didn't end there. Around noon, I was lying in bed when I felt something right next to me scream. A sharp, human-like yell, maybe 30 centimeters away from my head, and I jumped out of bed, heart in my throat, but the room was empty. Nobody else was home. I ended up checking all around the house, and I called my parents, but there was no one and nothing there. Even now, all these years later, I still think about that night. What was it, and why did it call me like that? What would have happened if I had just kept going straight like that? Friends and co-workers never believe me when I tell them, but I know what I heard and I know what I saw. Something was there, something not human, and it was aware of me in a way that is hard to explain. And so I'm wondering if anyone else here has experienced anything like this before. An entity communicating directly in your mind, guiding or trying to guide your path like that. Or maybe even just the screaming that I heard that morning. I'm still trying to figure out what that thing actually was, and I really don't have any answers yet. Now that I, a 23-year-old female, am back from Germany, I've had some time to think over the events of my trip. But it's hard to think positively, considering what happened to me the last night in Stuttgart, and I'd like a place to talk about it, so here I am. Now, I'd spent about 2 weeks travelling Germany for the Euros, and considering how many fellow Scotland fans were over for the games, I never felt completely alone, despite being a solo traveller in a foreign country. I guess I became too naive in how I trusted the older groups of Scots, who'd buy me drinks and chat with me all night about where they're from, who they knew, etc. Just typical Scottish chats, I guess, but I let my guard down. You see, that last night in Stuttgart happened like most other nights in Germany. I'd be by myself and would get noticed by a group of older men or women who'd inquire as to who I was with. When they heard I was alone, they'd remark at how brave I was as a good-looking lassie being here all by myself. I'd then be integrated into the group, drink with them, celebrate with them, and that night cry with them over Scotland's loss. Determined to enjoy my last night, though, I said goodbye to my new friends and donned on a short white dress draped in my Scotland flag and went out looking for a good place to drink and dance with strangers that I'd never meet again. I met a few people that night, but it was while I was alone that I met him. "That bag's bigger than you are," I heard as a jolly older man wandered over to me. It was true. I had my rucksack with me that night. "Where's your boyfriend to carry it for you?" "Not sure yet. Still deciding if he's going to be German or Scottish," I quipped back with a smile. Most of my interactions would start this way, with a friendly interaction resulting in an offer to come drink with their group. and after offering to take me to a nearby Irish pub to drink with him and his family, I graciously accepted and we began walking. He was overly exaggerating how incredible he thought that I was for doing this alone, bowing to me and excitedly telling passers-by how I was myself and how brave it was. I would sort of smile awkwardly and change the subject. I wish that I could say alarm bells were ringing, but honestly they weren't. After all, he was just a wee Scottish grandpa, one of many that I'd met that night. He began prodding me on if I had somewhere to sleep tonight, remarking how they had room in their hotel if need be. I wouldn't force myself on you or anything. I froze at that. It was very unexpected. I truly looked at him for the first time since I had met him. He was a relatively short man, taller than me still, but with a larger build and wrinkles to match the white hair that was poking out from under his Scotland cap. He began quickly explaining how he knows that I'd be cautious about that sort of thing, being a smart girl, that I could trust him, but again reiterated that he wouldn't force himself on me. I sort of laughed nervously as all the beer that I drank earlier seemed to drain from my body, and I began taking in my surroundings. Where did you say your family were again? Just in the Irish pub up this hill. So, like I was saying, I didn't really pay attention to him. We were still on the populated main street of Stuttgart, but the numbers were dwindling the further that we went. My ears suddenly pinged an alert to my brain, signaling that I had just missed something important, or perhaps horrifying. So I mustered up a smile and politely asked, "Sorry, what did you just say?" "That I'm a vegetarian because I killed my 44th man in a vegetable field." "Oh, I've been deployed in loads of countries. The first 6 lives I took were in Ireland, in fact." My blood ran cold. I'm a descendant of Irish immigrants who fled to Scotland to escape the brutality of the Troubles in Ireland. And I mean, did this man kill my family? Yeah, I killed 12 in Iraq. I could only listen to parts of his ramblings as I began desperately planning my escape, locking eyes with every person that walked past. There weren't many. We had almost reached the top of the main street now. "Why are you so tense all of a sudden?" The words brought me back to the conversation. "You know I can read you like a book, right? I'm doing all of this for you, you see. I want to protect you. And Molly, I can guarantee you right now, you don't realize how much danger you're in. You know," I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder, spinning around to see a young German man smiling at me. "Scotland!" He motioned to my flag. "I love Scotland." "Hey, is there anywhere to eat around here?" I blurted out, staring at him, praying that I'd turn around and the old man would be gone. Brief confusion crossed the German's face before the old man began rapidly jumbling up the sentence, "Sprechen die Deutsch," in an attempt to sound as if he was speaking German. "Essen," I whispered. The young man pointed in the direction that we just walked from. "Yeah, there's a McDonald's down there." I turned back to the old man, whose look I could only describe as emotionless now, as if he was staring right through me, like I was no longer there. I felt another cold shiver before smiling. "Hey, I'm gonna go grab something to eat, but I'll meet you in the Irish pub later, okay?" As if snapping back to his jolly self, the man quipped, "Now don't be like that. I'm off to a rave just now. I'm playing at it. You don't want to miss it." "I'll catch you later," I smiled. The man's face again dropped into a blank stare before he turned and walked off. I think the German man called after me, but I didn't hear him. I kept my head down and walked wherever my feet wanted to take me. I couldn't think, I could only walk. I really don't know how I got to the train station, nor how I got to the hostel, and weirdly there were no Irish pubs in Stuttgart, or at least not in that direction. In any case, to all solo female travelers, never say that you're traveling alone. And to the German man that I met that night, thank you for potentially saving my butt. I'm a 19-year-old female, and I was out to eat with my boyfriend, and the place that we were eating at has a live show right next door. We decided to listen outside to some of the bands playing once we were done eating. It must have been around 9 p.m. at this point. Shortly after going outside, this girl comes up to me and starts talking to me about all kinds of things. She has bright red hair, many piercings and tattoos. The first thing that she did was compliment what we were wearing. And I mean, I wasn't wearing anything special, a plain pink dress with Crocs. She seemed very friendly though and continued on a conversation with us, mainly me though. I figured it's because I have piercings and a tattoo, maybe that's why. I also kind of chalked it up to her being drunk or just being overly friendly. Eventually, she asked me a weird question that I didn't really understand and can't recall exactly, but it was something along the lines of, "What's your purpose here?" or something like that. I just remember not understanding what she was asking me and just telling her where I worked because it sounded like that's what she was asking me about. She said that she works at the strip club in the same town and came to dance. She then left abruptly afterward while texting on her phone and went over to this guy. Me and my boyfriend, we went to leave at this point. I didn't think too much of it and we passed by them. After turning the corner though, my boyfriend told me to check and see if I was being followed. I looked behind my shoulder and didn't see anybody. I walked a little further and looked back again. And then there was this guy. He was walking extremely quick and caught up to us pretty fast. He followed me all the way to my car, which was at least a mile away, until we got in and locked the doors. He was only a couple of feet away from my car, but then he just turned around and went back the way that he went. My boyfriend told me to start the car ASAP, and once we left, he told me that when we passed by them, he heard the girl say to the guy something along the lines of, "She's a little nervous, but..." And he had a bad vibe that they were traffickers or that they were going to try and pimp me out or something. Maybe snatch me up or something. I don't know, but it wouldn't have been very hard for him to do that. He was easily at least double my weight, as I'm only 100 pounds. He was following with a lot of speed too, and I mean, really? What else could be the motive? I don't know. The whole thing creeped me out a lot, and I'm really glad that my boyfriend was there. Growing up, I didn't know if spirits or ghosts were real. My mind was open to the idea, but I had never experienced anything to believe it. Anyways, I was 23 when I first moved out of home to my first apartment. I'm 28 now, so this was some time back. I will say that living there for the most part was pretty normal, but on a couple of occasions, there were some moments that sent chills right down my spine. The first time, I was chilling with my lady friend. We were just laying on my couch watching a movie or something. The kitchen was small, so looking at the TV, you can see the whole kitchen. I had a cheap trash can where the top lid spins, so to dispose the trash, you can just throw it in. We were just chilling, and out of the corner of my eye, I see the lid spin a few times, as if someone slapped it to make it spin. I noticed it, but I didn't say anything. My lady friend then asks me like 10 seconds later if I saw that. I was like, holy cow, I wasn't tripping. We investigated the trash and nothing. At first I thought maybe a rat jumped onto it or something. I mean, we didn't have a rat problem, but I had no idea what else could have done that. In short, we had no idea what the heck it was, and we were quite shook for a while. The second moment, though, it genuinely made my heart sink, and I've never felt that feeling ever since then. So my girlfriend, she would come over a lot. This was after my lady friend. I'm not a cheater or anything, but she, among a few of my other friends, always told me that my apartment had a bad vibe to it. Like the energy in there was sort of dark. I didn't think much about it. But we had these two stuffed animals that we won at a claw machine at our local arcade. After some time of her feeling uneasy, for some reason we both concluded that those stuffed animals just gave off bad vibes. She removed them off the bookshelf and put them in my kitchen cabinet before I left for work that day, just to put them away for the time being. Keep in mind, I dropped her off at her house and she didn't have a key to the apartment, and I always double-locked it. Fast forward a bit, I get back from work and decide to take a nap. I laid on my couch, and the way that I was laying, the bookshelf was in front of me a bit to the left side of the wall. At the time, I was having a lot of sleep paralysis. I still do from time to time, but in hindsight, I did experience a lot of sleep paralysis in that apartment for some reason. So of course, I'm waking up in sleep paralysis mode, my eyes open, unable to move. I look and all I see are those two stuffed animals sitting in the exact spot that they were at. My first thoughts were, what the heck? How the heck did those get back on there? It was impossible for those things to get back on that shelf, unless they walked back there, which obviously is impossible. Or is it? My heart sank into my gut. I felt my skin crawl, and that feeling of unease just took over my body. After I was finally able to move, I called her and asked if she put them back before we left the apartment, and she swore up and down that she didn't. She couldn't believe what I was telling her, as we were both in disbelief. I disposed of those two stuffed animals in the big trash, this time certain that they would never pop back up again. Now, I still consider myself a skeptic, as I never again had any other experiences with what I believe was paranormal. But the couple of times that I did, it was at those apartments. I actually had a friend who grew up in them, and she told me that they were definitely haunted. She's seen and heard things there too, but anyway, I should have probably mentioned too that at one point my girlfriend claimed that she one time saw a big shadow figure above me. It was allegedly in the corner of the ceiling, and I vividly remember her looking up to and telling me too. Of course, when I turned around, there was nothing there, but I did feel my skin crawl a bit after she told me that. She used to stay there when I went off to work as well, and always told me that she just always felt like she was being watched. It was the main reason that I started dropping her off back at her house when I would leave for work. This took place about 7 years ago, and it's been haunting me ever since. I've been a trucker for over a decade now, and you hear all sorts of stories on the road, but this one, it still gives me the chills. So I was driving through a particularly desolate stretch of highway in the Midwest when I decided to pull over at a truck stop for the night. The place was pretty run down, and there was only a few other trucks parked there. As I was getting ready to settle in, I overheard a couple of guys talking near one of the trucks. They seemed on edge, whispering urgently. I caught snippets of their conversation and heard one of them say, "Watch out for the lizards." I thought that that was a weird thing to say, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured that it was some sort of local slang or an inside joke. As the night wore on though, I started to drift off, but then I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. It was strange too, because it didn't sound just like one person. It was like a small group was walking around, but the pattern was irregular and unsettling to say the least. Curiosity got the better of me eventually, so I peeked out of my window. I couldn't see much in the dim light, but there were definitely figures moving around the parking area. They seemed to be skulking between the trucks, almost like they were looking for something. I told myself that it was probably just other drivers stretching their legs, but for whatever reason the unease just wouldn't go away. Suddenly though, I heard a sharp knock on my door. My heart leapt into my throat at that. I glanced at the clock and it was well past midnight. I called out, asking who it was, but there was no response. Just the sound of footsteps shuffling away. I was too spooked to investigate further, so I locked my doors and I just tried to get some sleep. Now, just as I was drifting off again, I heard a low, sort of hissing sound coming from somewhere nearby. It was faint but persistent, like somebody whispering just out of earshot. I squeezed my eyes shut and told myself that it was just my imagination. But then I heard the footsteps again, closer this time. Throughout the night, I could hear knocks and scratches on the other trucks around me as well. Every once in a while, there was some sort of yelling or moaning coming from the distance, like someone or something was trying to communicate or call out. Occasionally, there was a smoky smell too, like a cigarette would waft through the air when these things or whoever was out there were close to my truck. The rest of the night was a blur of eerie sounds and, well, creeping dread. I kept telling myself that it was just some weird local prank, but I don't know about that anymore. The whole thing felt very off. As soon as the first light of dawn broke, I didn't waste a second. I fired up my truck and I got out of there without even looking back. I did not want to see what might have been left in the morning, and to this day, I just cannot shake the feeling that there was something more to those lizards than meets the eye. Who knows, maybe it was just an overactive imagination. Or maybe there's something out there in those backwood truck stops that we're just better off not knowing about. Whatever the case, stay safe out there and keep your eyes and ears open, because you just never know who or what might be lurking in the dark out there. This happened about 13 years ago. I was in my early 20s at the time. So, to preface this, while growing up, my sister and I had many encounters that you could consider supernatural, I suppose. Her more so than me. She seemed to be harassed by spirits often, and sometimes I shared some of those encounters too. Now, several years ago, after moving out of home, I went to visit my family and we were staying the night at my grandparents' place. It was a normal day, nothing out of the ordinary. I went to bed that night, my sister and I sleeping in different rooms. I dreamt I was laying in bed, a different bed in the dream, no recollection of what the room looked like, when suddenly an intense feeling of despair just washed over me. But it was worse than that. Every positive feeling in the world was erased, and I was left with this overwhelming pressure of all the negativity, and I started crying. I rarely cry, and as hilarious as this example might be, think of the effect the Dementors from Harry Potter have on people. In the dream, I rolled over and a red dome had encased the bed, and a black hooded figure stood at the end of the bed holding a scroll in his hand. At this point, I lost it and started screaming in fear. I screamed so loud that the red dome split open as I woke myself up from my own screams. My stepdad came into the room and asked if that was me making the noise. I just mumbled, "Yeah, I think so." Eventually, I went back to sleep, and that was that for the night. Now, the next morning, I went to tell my sister about my dream, and she said, "Before you tell me that, I need to tell you something that happened to me last night. You see, I couldn't get to sleep, and suddenly I noticed a person standing at the end of the bed holding a piece of paper in their hand. At that, I was terrified, too scared to sleep for the next few nights, but nothing else ever happened like that since then, which is strange, right? It definitely put me on edge for a while, but thankfully, nothing else happened. It was a random day, and my family and I had a trip planned out to go somewhere far from home. It was to go to a place in the Philippines, and while on the way, we used a GPS tracker to reach our destination. None of us were aware that the GPS may not be actually accurate, but we followed the route anyway. My uncle was driving the car that day. It was a fortune car, big enough to fit many people inside. As we were making our way there, it was still sunset, and we were going up a hill surrounded by tall trees. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep for a while because I was pretty exhausted from all the journey that we went through to just get here. But I soon woke up to my mother's voice saying, "Be careful, we're going to fall off." I looked around the car window and we were on top of a hill now. The sides of the road were so thin and tight. One wrong turn and we would all come crashing down. My cousins and I were at the back of the car. We stayed quiet because we knew that to panic in a situation like this was going to be very unhelpful. My mum was the only one panicking, and As we went further, my uncle drove slowly, and thankfully we didn't fall off and managed to find an area that we could turn and make a U-turn. It was still on the hill, mind you, but the area was wide enough now. After making it back to the main road safely, we were all pretty shaken, scared even. Now fast forward a bit. After that it was nighttime, obviously. There was nothing in sight, no lights, and it was just pretty much blackness and nothingness all around us. My family, they didn't follow the GPS this time. They used their memories because they'd used a different road before, apparently. We were going up a hill again, and I had no idea where it was, but all I saw were trees around the car and the quiet sounds of the car wheels driving over the gravel. Then at some point we stopped, and I was confused by that. But it appeared that there was no continuation of the road ahead. Everyone in the car was quiet now. My mother asked my uncle to check outside. When they opened the car door, it was really cold. The wind was strong, and I heard the trees. It was really spooky, and it sent a bit of a chill down my spine. My uncle closed the door as he turned on the front lights of the car, and there, all of a sudden, was a line of people, lots of them. I don't have any idea what they were doing alone in the woods there, and it was so weird. We quickly backed out of there, and we made our way back home after that. After that too, I fell asleep from exhaustion, I think. I hadn't eaten all day because we were stranded in the woods, and the next thing I know, I woke up and we were already on the main road and stopped by a 7-Eleven shop. They bought some hot dogs for my cousin and I to eat. All of us were starving and had no energy at this stage. I'm glad my family and I were safe, but I guess it's just a reminder that if you want to go somewhere, don't always trust the GPS or the maps because routes are definitely outdated at times, and in our case, that was definitely what happened. Still though, what those people were doing up at that mountain, in the cold like that, out in the dark with no light, I have no idea. I was 20 at the time, home alone at my family's rural house with one of my high school buddies who lived with us at the time. He was 18 and, importantly, there were no cars in the driveway, so the house appeared to be unoccupied. Now, my buddy is short, skinny, baby-faced, and eternally looks like a middle schooler, but he's a grown man who can hold his own in a fight. A lifted, grey Julie quad cab with a spot of white primer where a company logo would have been pulls into our driveway. I don't recognize it, or anyone in it. They stop and 3 dudes hop out of the truck. The driver has a semi-automatic in a holster on his hip too. They had to drive past our no soliciting, no trespassing sign, violators may be shot, to get where they were at. I'm observing this through the crack in the blinds in the living room window. My buddy was around back pretending to be a blacksmith with our homemade charcoal forge. He came around the side of the house while I was observing. I couldn't hear, but I could see body language. I noticed my buddy was holding the hammer in a very specific way so that he could whip it around his shoulder and throw it like Thor if he needed to. This told me that my buddy also had no idea who these people were. At that, I grabbed his deer rifle off of the living room coffee table. Silly place to store a gun, I know, but that's where it was. Slammed a single round into the chamber, and aimed through the slit in the blinds at the armed trespasser. Jumping now to my buddy's perspective, here's how their conversation went. Hey there, kid. Are your parents home? We're some local ranchers going door to door selling fresh cuts. Yeah, my dad's inside getting ready to go shooting. He's got plenty of meat, but my uncle might want some. Let me call him. To which my buddy pulled out his phone and called 911. After a moment, the trespassers realized that the cops were coming and got back in their truck, and they left pretty quickly. I found out later that the truck was actually stolen, and we had had a run-in with the group that was responsible for over 30 break-ins over the past few months, some of them pretty violent. I just woke up in the middle of the night remembering this, and I need to get it off my chest. So when I was 16, my dad, brothers and I lived in an old rundown house pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It was a private rental. My brother would do work for the landlord to pay our rent. Our landlord never came off as particularly creepy or anything, but that could be because I rarely went outside when he came over to talk to my dad, and he wouldn't dare do anything in front of my dad. But anyway, I was home alone one day and my dad and brothers went out, somewhere, I really don't remember where, but I had my dog in a fenced-in yard outside, but that was it. I was in my room doing whatever I was doing, probably playing The Sims 2 at the time. We lived in the middle of nowhere, like I said, and there was a long driveway which the window of my bedroom directly faced. I could see or hear anyone driving up the driveway at any point. I saw a car, but not my dad's, and immediately began to get a bit freaked out. I ran and shut all the blinds in the house, turned off all the lights and checked the doors were locked. But it was our landlord. He lived next door, about 2 miles away from our house, and yes, that was the closest house. This wasn't the first time that he'd come here unexpectedly. It had happened twice before, and both times I was home alone. Those first 2 times, he was only there for about 10 minutes, walking around the outside of the house and then quickly leaving. But this time was different. I could sense that something was wrong, so I grabbed a big kitchen knife and hid under the kitchen table. I heard him pull up outside and open our front gate. My dog outside was going ballistic and barking. I heard him yell, "Shut up, mutt." I could hear his footsteps walking up to the door. He tried to open the door and I was freaking out. At this point, I texted my dad too. He was coming straight home, but they'd be like an hour still. He continued to walk around the outside of our house, trying to peek into each window. The house is old and has 3 doors that you can enter from the outside from. He tried to open all 3. I thought that maybe he didn't know I was home. Maybe the last 2 times were a coincidence, but he started saying things, including calling out my name, which means that he knew that I was home alone. I couldn't hear what else he was saying through the double brick walls, but I quietly creeped through the house, following his voice up and down the hallway. I was trying to hear what he was saying, and that's when he said something that I'll never forget. "I'm going to burn the house down, but I'll let you out first." Of course, I didn't take him seriously, which scares me even more now that I think about it. But he wanted me to come out. He wanted me to take his threat seriously. And that's the part that really gets to me. I know exactly what could have happened if I had believed him, and my life would have been, well, completely different. He was there for at least 30 minutes too, maybe closer to an hour in fact, and I mean, he was very persistent. He left before my dad came home, and I told him everything and we moved out soon after this. I still don't know how he knew that I was home alone too. My dad never saw him on the way driving out, so he knew my dad was gone because there was no car in the driveway, but how did he know that I wasn't with him? The whole thing was creepy, and in fact, I'm just realizing now that I think we were evicted in the end. We didn't leave. We lived in a caravan at my uncle's house for a year before finding a house in a different town in the end, and to be honest, I was happier to be there in that caravan than in that house. This is by far the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me, and genuinely I have no idea what to think about it. So 14 years ago, a group of friends and I were hanging outside and eating pizza on top of our friend's car when we all saw what looked like a monkey swinging high in the trees a good distance away. We lived in GA, and I joked that one of the apes from the local zoo must have escaped, but there was definitely an uneasy feeling amongst us. Everything was quiet too, and on this warm GA day, we live in an area with a lot of water. There's lots of insects, but everything just felt quiet and still all of a sudden. The ape then stopped swinging from the trees, and even though it was really large, a black figure, we could just tell that it was sort of looking at us. Then the ape started straightening its posture, looking more human and less like a primate. It was unsettling to say the least. We all just stood there sort of frozen and watching. Suddenly, the man seemed to turn around and crouch down, but as he was crouching down, his shoulder blades were getting impossibly larger, growing over his head before huge wings sort of sprang from its back out of nowhere, and it jumped off the branch and flew off. Even from a distance, we could tell that this thing was absolutely huge too. At that moment, it was like the spell that we were under broke, and we all scrambled to get back into the car, screaming. I didn't sleep that night. I felt like whatever it was had followed me home and was watching all night. I'm sure that it probably wasn't, but I was terrified. Honestly, too, I definitely wouldn't have believed it if 3 other people hadn't have seen it also that night. And it's just one of the weirdest things that's ever happened to me, and something I'll never forget. I've had quite a few weird and paranormal experiences in my life, but that one is by far one of the most terrifying, weird, and memorable ones yet. So I moved into this house with my family, mum, dad, 2 sisters, 2 dogs, about 8 years ago. I was 10 at the time and my sisters were 12 and 15. Some of my neighbors' kids went to our school too and were in the same grade as my 12-year-old sister at the time. Trigger warning here, but they told us that the son of the family who lived here before us had actually ended his own life in our garage. As a kid, I very much believed that too. They even went as far as to say that that's why the handprints are there, which always freaked me out because on our garage door, there is a set of handprints on the side that just never seem to come off. Anyway, fast forward a few years later, my dad planted some purple tulips in the front for my mum because she has epilepsy and that's the representative color. She had always mentioned how she felt bad replacing the yellow ones that were there previously for the son. I had no idea that it had any sort of significance until she would always say that the story was just so tragic and she could only tell us everything when we were older. She always got a little bit choked up talking about it too. Over the years, weird things had started happening though. I would hear footsteps when I was home alone with my dogs beside me. My dogs will randomly begin barking into my sister's room, which used to belong to the son apparently. The dogs refused to go into that room at times. I would hear knocks on my door, but nobody was there. My hangers were all flipped up in the closet at one point, and one even started moving on its own with no fans on or anything. Something about my sister's room had always freaked me out too, and my sister had even said that she purposely falls asleep in mine or my other sister's room because that room terrifies her. It was in the basement. She even said that while away at college or anywhere else she was fine, but something about that room gives her sleep paralysis, and the only way that she can describe it is like the Babadook hiding in the corner watching her. Could this just be a ton of weird coincidences, or is there actually something here? My dad has 2 short paranormal experiences from when he was around 20 years old and living with friends in a haunted flat that is now long demolished that have always freaked me out. He lived with 4 friends in the late 70s, early 80s, and were into the punk rock scene at the time, nights in the pub and all that. I do wonder if the stories could be related to drugs, but he insisted that he never took them personally. And one night, a girlfriend of one of the roomies was staying in the flat alone whilst the rest went to the pub, and later that night, she came crying into the pub to find them saying that there were voices coming from inside the flat with her. This was the first hint that something creepy was happening in that flat, and his standout story, however, is pretty brief, but he was sleeping on the sofa one night, woke up and saw a person with no eyes leaning over the back of the sofa looking down at him. He said that he was frozen in fear and it disappeared after a few seconds. It wasn't his roommates and he didn't recognize the person at all. His other experience was when he was younger, around 15, when he was living at my grandparents' house, and this story has always got to me. So one night, When my grandparents, or his parents, were out, he walked out of the front room to go upstairs to go to the toilet, and he swears that he saw a naked man, wet skin with no arms, long damp black hair, down below the shoulder level, stood at the top of the stairs in the light looking down before just disappearing. He never told his parents this because he didn't want to scare them, but he told me a few years ago when I told him about some of my minor experiences. I have visited that house a few times since my dad told me the story, and when I stand at the bottom of those stairs and look up, I can't help but feel a scary chill run down my spine, imagining what my dad saw when he was young. He hasn't seen anything since then and is now almost 70, I think. He's definitely not one to make up stories, and his other roommates also had experiences in that flat too, though minor compared to what he experienced. I struggle to recall some of the other stories, but to be honest, my dad's ones are definitely the ones that stand out the most. I live alone with my mum in a relatively nice area, in a section of the house our friend owns. I have some anxiety issues from a stalking incident in a prior area of town, so sometimes paranoia gets the best of me, but I'm able to use logic to reason my way out of it 99.9% of the time. Now, our friend frequently travels, and my mum has had health issues recently. Every person who lives here has to go outside and go through storm doors to the basement to access the laundry, and we have motion sensors through the basement and yard to help us see as we're walking. My front door, it has a small window with a broken blind or two, so there's small peepholes. And this just happened about an hour ago, and honestly, I'm still a bit shaken by the whole thing. So our housemate is traveling, and my mum felt ill enough earlier that I told her to go to an emergency room and make sure nothing serious was happening, and I was left by myself, which isn't too uncommon here. I'd been doing my normal routines when I remembered that there was laundry in the dryer, so I got up and walked down my steps into the basement, and I had left the storm doors open. Now is where you'd think that the story would start, but surprisingly my laundry routine went fine. I closed the storm doors and proceeded back up to the stairs to my section of the home. I had to pee really bad, so the second that I closed the door, I placed the bin down and had the thought to lock my door tonight. Something I don't tend to do, in fact, because my mum is a smoker, and hearing the locks at night, well, it's pretty loud and it'll wake me up a lot. But anyway, if I hadn't, that could have been a huge mistake that night. I used the bathroom and ended up taking a bit longer than I needed to, scrolling around social media. I remember all the clean clothes, so I stripped mostly naked besides underwear, and I throw on a pair of shorts, and as I grab a shirt to throw on, my heart, brain, gut, and everything all of a sudden just screams, "Door, now, locks." In that second, thankfully my body responded and took the 2 steps towards the door. I tried to lock it, but the doorknob wouldn't move. That only ever happens if the knob is being turned, and I know for a fact that I wasn't turning it. I locked the secondary lock and slammed my back into the door, waiting for a minute to test the doorknob lock again, hoping that it would work this time. Thankfully, this time it did, and while I hadn't noticed at first, the motion sensor light had activated far too long after I was inside for me to have done it. And I mean, they're such terrible lights, I have to wave my hands in front of them occasionally to activate them, so I'm like 95% sure that somebody was out there that night. I sat with my back to the door for who knows how long before I got up and turned most of the lights off, grabbed a knife that I had next to me all night. I looked out both windows that faced that direction after a while, and I saw nothing, luckily I guess, because honestly, I don't know what I would have done if I had seen someone. I really don't know what to do about all of this, but I am almost certain that there was someone there that night, someone with bad intentions. Two nights back, I had an experience with something in the wooded areas around the Maple Lake in Illinois at the Overlook. I tried to do my research on what it could have been, I came across encounters of other cryptids like skinwalkers and wendigo. However, the suburban nature of this encounter has led me to disqualify the possibility of it being either one of those creatures, and its appearance and location has led me to believe that it may be what is regarded as a crawler. I don't know what it was, but it was something that felt human. But I know it couldn't have been a human. It felt too much like an animal. It still hit me like I was being watched by an animal too. It just took longer for me to catch on than I usually do, I suppose. Anyway, so I'm there off the main streets in the southwestern suburbs at the Overlook, listening to music in my car. I often like to get out of the city just to clear my head, and I feel like I heard something pulling up to me from behind. You know it's late, it's dark, people like to come to the Overlook to drink or find some privacy, so I check my rearview mirror, and that's when I see it, in the moonlight. Something is in the shadows across the road up the hill. I'm unsure of exactly what it is. I move to adjust my mirror to get a better look when I see eyes like how animals have eyes that glisten in the dark. It's like that, but they're watching me through the rearview mirror, transfixed, focused, intent like the way people do in photographs. It looked like what I now imagine is the devil of some kind, tall and white as snow. It froze me in place. It had straightforward eyes like predators do. That's all I got to look at as it was slinked up against and behind the trees. My head, I guess, finally processed what I was seeing, and I get hit, like someone poured ice down my back. That feeling I get when someone is approaching me from behind or something is watching me. This sends me absolutely bugging out into panic, so I shift into drive and hook a right forward, and out of the lot, back onto the main road. Running along the hill, I speed up and head forward. I just drive until I hit the main road with streetlights again, and I don't stop until I get back out of the surrounding preserves area. The eyes, they just felt so human though, but it felt impossible for someone to be out there, but I know it just couldn't have been an animal because when I'm out in the preserves, it never felt like that when I was among deer or the other animals that I know are out there. Whatever it was, it felt wrong, like it was invading the space, but it didn't feel like a person exactly, like the feeling you get when a person is around that you sort of know. I keep my guard up pretty well when I'm out alone, but whatever it was, it flew beneath my senses and fit into the dark pretty quickly. Again, I don't know what it was, but it made me feel so sick that I was there and I missed it. Like I didn't know it was there until I fully registered something was out there with me. If anyone has any idea as to what it could have been, then please do give me a better understanding. I'm willing to talk or listen. I've been a skeptic as long as I've run in circles amongst my fellow outdoors people. But this encounter, it has quickly turned my perception of the natural and unnatural upside down. This happened about 15 years ago at a ranch-style house in the middle of the country, surrounded by farmland and sparsely spaced houses. I haven't talked to my dad in years, and while he claimed to be religious, he more so thought that he was than him actually being religious. I've been a very headstrong skeptic, was a typical teenage atheist, and still am an atheist, I suppose, but have become more spiritual in my late 20s and 30s, or at least open to it, I guess. So my dad and I were home, and he was in his office room with the radio very loud, and I was in the living room working on college work. My dad, he can't hear very well, at all. However, we both heard the kitchen door open with a pop and sort of squeaking kind of sound, which was the typical sound when opened. Work boots stomping on the kitchen floor. We all wore work boots because we were outside laborers and walked heavy, and the sound of both the work boots being taken off and being dropped on the kitchen floor, which is what we, my dad, little brother and I, did, and a very common noise. My dad and I both heard it and figured it was my little brother coming home. However, the outside free-roaming dogs hadn't barked and the driveway alarms didn't go off. Maybe the dogs were out roaming, or maybe the driveway just didn't pick up the car. That's how he tried to rationalize it anyway. So I called my little brother, and he was 45 minutes away still. My dad and I searched outside the entire house, ground floor and basement, every room, and it was just us. Like I said, I'm not religious, but something just isn't right about that house, like at all. And a decade plus later, my little brother still swears that it wasn't him. He has story about seeing shadow people for years, and something following him on and in his car as well, and many, many more stories. But my eyes water and I get goosebumps every time that I share this, even all these years later. Many, many weird or questionable things happened in that house too. My older sister swears that she saw what she thought was my little brother when he was just a toddler, but it turns out that it was like a light figure. Something during the middle of the night when she got up to, she thought that she saw my little brother in the hallway by the bathroom at one point. It wasn't my little brother though. She locked herself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out until someone woke up and knocked on the door. This was like 20 plus years ago, and eventually she got older and she wouldn't talk about it anymore. But for the longest time, when asked about the story, she would always say the exact same thing. And again, when I share this, I have to admit that it's a little creepy. When I was about 6 years old, I stayed at my grandmother's quite frequently. She lived in a mobile home, or a trailer I guess you could call it, and the washroom and living room were on opposite sides of the trailer. Now one day, I walked to the end of the hallway to use the washroom. When I looked inside to find the light switch and turn it on, I saw my cousin, who sometimes visits my grandma, look me directly in the eye and put a finger up to her lips like a shush sound, but she was completely silent. She then got on her hands and knees and crawled behind the counter and out of sight. I felt a feeling of dread and instantly knew that this wasn't my cousin, or even a human being for that matter. I took off running and screaming for my grandma. We searched the entire trailer together, but it was only us in there. While we searched, I told her that I had seen my cousin in there, and she told me not to be silly. My cousin is not visiting town and she's home, which is a couple of hours' drive away. To this day, I don't know what I saw or why I saw it or why it made the shush gesture, but the whole thing, it has sat with me all these years later. So last night on the baby monitor, I saw a hand gently patting my 4-month-old son's belly when he was crying to console him. This isn't the first time too. We don't have squatters, we don't have attic access to any of the bedrooms, we have 2 dogs and we both work from home. We would know if somebody else was secretly living with us, but anyway, back towards the end of May, my son was taking a nap in his bassinet in our room. He's just a baby, so he naps frequently throughout the day. This was probably about 5 p.m, I would guess. My wife and I were on the deck outside grilling and had the baby monitor out with us. He was starting to wake up and was fussing a bit, so she went inside to go to the bathroom before getting him upstairs. I was bringing food inside as she was walking out of the bathroom, and when she saw me, she stopped dead in her tracks, like she was absolutely shocked to see me. I jokingly said, "I live here too, you know." And that's when she told me that she just saw a hand on the baby upstairs a second ago when looking at the monitor. In a sudden panic when she realized that it wasn't me upstairs, we rushed up and didn't find anything or anyone in the room. When she told me, it's not that I didn't believe her, I guess. I was just trying over and over again to think of a logical explanation for what she saw, but nothing just ever made any sense. Now, my first thought from an outsider's view would be, oh, this is common and it's just a glitch showing a previous image on the screen or something. But this baby camera and monitor is just for a live feed. There's no recording or on-cam memory or anything like that. The image is very clear and doesn't have visual effects or anything. if it is out of range, it just goes to a white screen stating the signal has been lost. It doesn't drop bitrate or get blurry or anything like that. I also am a videographer for a living, so I'm quite familiar with the concept of the artifacts or occasional compression glitch showing old footage that you would see on security cams that has onboard memory. But I can assure you that this was not that. In the 4 years of owning and using these cameras for our 2 kids, that has never happened too. Anyway, fast forward to last night, about a month and a half after that first occurrence. Our son now usually sleeps in his crib in his room until he wakes up for a feeding in the middle of the night. Last night at 3 a.m. on the dot, I heard him crying on the monitor right on my nightstand. I went to nudge my wife to bring him in, but she wasn't in bed. As I rolled back over to look at the monitor, I saw a hand come into frame from the side, gently pat him as he was crying for 2 soft pats on the belly, then leave the frame. I didn't think twice. I figured it was obviously my wife, and she was maybe prepping the changing table to change his diaper or something, which is why she had patted him instead of picking him up right away. But that was when my wife came out of the bathroom in our bedroom, confirming that she was not in his room across the house. I immediately stood up and said, "Oh my goodness, I thought it was you," as the adrenaline was rushing my body. I could barely speak, in fact. It's true when people say that when something happens like this that they froze or couldn't speak or whatever. I was just completely choked up and had a hard time explaining what I meant. Again, we both went into his room and, as far as we could tell, he was alone. Now, what I don't get is, if this is a ghost or a spirit or whatever, why is it making itself seen? We have 2 cameras in the room, his baby monitor and a blink camera on a shelf that we use just for live viewing, so we can't access previous cloud storage that only triggers with motion. 2 separate occasions of being seen, I feel like it goes against all of the stories that you would hear about spirits and cameras. Not an orb, not a light, but truly a physical hand. This spirit is seemingly friendly, I guess, because otherwise I feel like it wouldn't try to comfort our baby. Anyway, has anyone experienced anything like this before? I'm trying not to overreact and take this experience as a guardian angel looking over our baby, but I'm not so sure about that, and I would really, really appreciate some help. My ex and I were walking on a trail near my house one day, and around my area, homeless people are known to frequent. Everything was pretty much par for the course, until I walked off the path and onto what seemed to be a deer trail. On it, I saw a few deer at first, but later I heard what at first seemed to be voices. I assumed that maybe a homeless community camped there or something, but we came across a deer which lowered its head and crown of antlers and continued walking toward us until it was maybe about 10 feet away and then disappeared into the forest. Okay, so maybe the deer was sick or had a wasting disease or something. Still, strange behavior for a wild animal. I kept hearing the voices until I realized that it was actually chanting at too low of a volume to register what the words were. And the deeper we walked down that deer trail, I realized that it couldn't be the homeless as the chanting repeated itself. It was sort of on a loop almost, like the sounds were repeating even if the words themselves weren't audible. And finally we came to what appeared to be a concrete tunnel at the end of the trail, and I had this odd feeling that if we didn't leave now that we were about to die. Not dread, but like terror. So, we ran from that place, and well, the looped chanting followed us down the trail, all while I felt like we were being watched. What I mean by that is that the sound of the chanting, it didn't grow fainter from behind us as we ran, and it sort of stayed the same volume, as if whatever it was following us. Also, I didn't know this at the time, but later my ex told me that people apparently went missing there and some had even died there. I heard rumors throughout my life to avoid deer trails here, but I never thought that there was anything to it. I am still perplexed, and I don't know what actually happened that night. When I was a kid, I lived in a house with my cousins until we eventually moved out. I had lived there until I was about 12, and I had a variety of experiences there. I know that they were real too because my family has had similar experiences. My first encounter? Well, it was while I was watching TV in my room. Suddenly, the dresser in the hallway began making really loud banging noises. I unfortunately can't share images right now as I'm out of country, but it was wooden and had large metal hoops to open the drawers in it. The sound was made by the metal hoops slamming against the wood. I could see them moving from where I was laying. Every time I would get up to look at it closer though, it would always stop. Obviously I was freaked out, and after a while of this pattern, it stopped and I just continued watching TV. It couldn't have been my sibling or a cousin messing around with me too, as my family was out and my cousins were visiting family out of state. The second thing though that I can remember was constantly hearing voices. They would always be in my mother's voice too, calling out either mine or siblings' names. It always happened when I was home alone, and once I went downstairs thinking my parents had come home, but there was no one. The only thing out of place was a teacup sitting on the table in the living room. The teacup brings to me another thing that happened once before as well. Nearly every night, I would hear cups sort of tinkering around together. I could tell it was the teacups too, since it made a sort of specific higher pitched sound that other cups wouldn't. I would go downstairs after hearing it sometimes, but nothing looked different. This final one was the last large experience that I had, and it occurred a few months after my grandfather's passing. So sometimes I would sleep in his room as we were very close and it was comforting. And one night, while I was drifting off, the cabinets in the room that would hold his medication, they began violently slamming and banging. But then, I saw a figure in the hallway, hunched over and convulsing. This image is literally burned into my memory from how horrific it was to a 9-year-old. In the end too, I just sort of covered my head in the blankets and eventually I must have fallen asleep. The next morning I asked my parents about it, and they said that they had heard the cabinets too, but that they didn't see anything in the hallway like I had. So, those are the stories that I can recall for now, and I'll probably share some more another time, but yeah, that house, there's something wrong with it, and I'm glad that I don't live there anymore. So my coworker came into work today and told me about her night. She was in bed and both her and her significant other smelled burning and heard crackling around 2 a.m. They both got out of bed to check it out. They figured it was the bug zapper outside. They went to turn it off and exited to the porch where they both heard a consistent bark from the field below. This field had no nearby houses or anything, and it's a bit of a trek to even get up their driveway. The bark was weird, but sounded like a normal dog aside from the fact that it was just consistent, almost rhythmic in fact. They decided to go ahead and check out the field. They took her car down, and as soon as the engine was cut, there was a pit all of a sudden in their stomachs. Exiting the car, it sounded like the bark was so far away now that even though they were right on top of it before, it just made no sense. It hadn't have seemed to have changed much, but it didn't sound as close as it did when they were in the house. My coworker decided that it wasn't a good idea to leave her child alone in the house for too long, and so in the end she went back. About a half an hour passed, and the dog is still consistently barking in the field. Significant other decides to go back and make sure that there isn't a dog in the ditch or something. She decided to call him so he wasn't just out there completely alone. Once he got back there, he started walking into the field trying to find it, the pit still in his stomach the whole time. He decided not to call out, but to just look instead. He left strapped just in case as well, by the way. The entire time my coworker listened on the phone. The barking grew more intense and the dog went crazy as it had obviously seen the light from his phone or something. The weirdest thing though was that he saw nothing, but the barking continued to grow louder until he must have been right on top of it. She had commented at one point that it was so deafening it sounded like the dog itself was holding the phone. But then, all of a sudden, just dead silence. No running, no barking, no breathing, nothing. No dog found or anything. She messaged her father who lives close by and he had heard the barking too, but obviously didn't go to investigate. She had her father ask the person who owns the property to go and check out where they had heard what was going on too the next day. Nothing found so far, and it's been raining there, so there should be tracks. And I also decided to ask them if it sounded like a fox or a coyote or anything. They lived down there long enough to distinguish between the two, and this sounded too much like a bloodhound to be anything else. So if you guys have any more ideas, then I would love to hear them. For reference, we're in Ohio, so we're in Appalachia, and I know the place has a bit of a bad reputation for stuff like this, but yeah, I hope that's helpful. So my boyfriend and I live in a small neighborhood. Our house faces a densely wooded riverfront. Our street isn't very busy. It's dark and there isn't a park in the woods or anything, so not many people go down there, much less the middle of the night. But last night at around midnight, my boyfriend was sitting on our front porch smoking a cigarette when he heard a weird voice in the distance. It was clearly speaking a different language, and the only way that he could describe it was it sounded like Mickey Mouse. He thought that it was just some kids messing around with him, but as he listened closely, he noticed that it was just one voice talking and laughing. It wasn't talking to anyone except itself, whatever or whoever it was. It was far enough off in the distance that my boyfriend felt comfortable listening, until it started whistling an eerie song that he couldn't place, and as it whistled, it began to grow closer. He ran inside and locked all the doors and the windows. He tried waking me up, but I get up at like 5 a.m. every morning for work and I sleep like a rock. Hearing about it though, when I woke up to get a drink of water, really gave me the heebie-jeebies. My first thought was maybe some crackhead tweaking out in the woods perhaps, but of course my brain immediately goes to cryptids. I can't help it. But what do you think? I've been combing the internet for hours this morning, trying to find out legends and myths about this, but I haven't had much luck, so if you know anything, then please do give me some ideas. So I was alone once on a Friday evening during summer in my house around maybe 2013 to 2016. I really don't remember the exact year, but I was still in my early teens at this time as well. And anyways, usually on Fridays, I would go with my parents along with my sister to help them out at their workplace. But well, this Friday, they went only with my sister and I was left alone that day at the house. I was playing Minecraft on my old PC inside my bedroom with my headset on when suddenly I hear footsteps, like someone was rubbing their feet against the carpet in the living room, which is right next to my bedroom. I had the volume really low, so I heard it loud and clear, even through my headphones. I turn my head and look at my door, puzzled and thinking if my parents had come back to get something, or maybe my bigger brother had come to the house to grab stuff. I get up from my chair and open my door, but I don't see anyone. The lights are on in the living room, but nobody is there. I go to the front door and the back door. Both are locked. The windows are locked too. I check the driveway and the front gate, and they're closed with no cars there. I end up going to every room and turn on the lights and check every corner, even the closet, but there was nothing. Nothing had been moved or changed. So I go to call my mum and ask her if she had been inside the house. She said no, that they were already at work, and suggested that it might have been my brother, but I told her that he hadn't been here either, and I didn't hear a car pull up or anything, so She just says that I was probably just hearing things and just to make sure everything is locked. I hang up and triple check everything is locked and walk back to my room, absolutely creeped out now. I lock the bedroom door and leave the lights on in my room. I definitely turned up the headphones volume too after that and continued to play, albeit creeped out, till my parents came back from work. To this day, it still really creeps me out thinking about it, especially because that house and property in general has had a history of paranormal activity on it. All of my family, even my skeptic brother and dad, have seen or heard things at least. Even my brother's ex-girlfriend has said that she would see or hear things in the house and in the back garage as well. We still live there, but since blessing the house, most of the activity seems to have gone away, which I'm thankful for, but still, this house still has me on edge sometimes, and I don't like that. In 2019, I was 25 and struggling financially. I asked my mum if I could take one of her rooms in order to pay less rent. I moved in, and then soon after I asked my girlfriend to move in with me to help pay rent. It was a 4-bedroom house with a studio attached in the back with a small family. On one half of our house was my mum in the master bedroom with one of my twin sisters, Carla, who was 13. It was a 4-bedroom house with a studio attached in the back with a small family. On one half of our house was my mother in the master bedroom with one of my twin sisters, Carla, who was 13. In the other room was a man who was renting a room. On the other half of the home was my sister, Janet, 19, with her baby daughter, and my other twin sister, Angela, 13. Then finally myself and my girlfriend, Kylie. Myself and my girlfriend, aside from some wine or mixed drinks on rare occasions, are completely sober. We're the type to just stay home and watch movies, really. My Catholic family was fairly poor growing up, and so I like to think of ourselves as just regular hardworking people. Most importantly, though, we like to think of ourselves as rational. We don't really deal with much nonsense. No previous strange occurrences in any of our lives, and my girlfriend is also a Christian. Now, one night at around 8 p.m., myself and my girlfriend were in bed, and we were alarmed to hear the most heavy footsteps that you could imagine on the roof. It sounded like a big man with big boots, and it was very clearly going from corner to corner above our room. I got up and went to investigate, but when I did, everything was normal in our house. I went outside expecting to see somebody on our roof, probably the back neighbors, but there was nothing. We asked the people in the back, but they had no clue. Me and my girlfriend and our cat were the only ones that heard it apparently too. I thought that maybe it was someone running away from someone or something, but our roof had that very steep triangle shape to it. Anyway, a few days after, again myself and my girlfriend were on our bed and we heard running above us. This time though, it was quick, light running like a child. This time it was more odd. We went to ask my sisters again, but nothing, which was very strange. Anyway, every so often, we would hear these steps above us. I started believing that we had a person living in our attic, and every time I heard the steps, I'd pop my head in the attic and shine my phone around, but again, nothing. Eventually, I climbed all the way up to search too, but again, there was nobody up there. Nobody else heard them too except me and my girlfriend, and it started getting very frustrating. I have anxiety and have always had trouble sleeping. When I'd hear the steps at night, it'd be very uncomfortable, and when it would wake me up, I'd have trouble falling back asleep. I started getting very angry at the situation, in fact, and I was a competitive boxer at the time, and sleep was pretty urgent for me. Myself and my girlfriend came to the conclusion that this was probably an animal or, who knows, maybe a ghost. Myself and my girlfriend came to the conclusion that this was probably just an animal. One day, though, I was alone in the house and I heard footsteps. At this point, I was pretty ticked off and I perfectly rushed my way up into the attic. I crawled around saying, "Here I am, I'm all by myself. What are you about? What do you want? Show yourself. Do something," etc. But there was nothing. One night, footsteps began at around 2 in the morning. I'm awake now and the stress is high. I start doing research on my phone, animal sounds on roof or walls, etc. Nothing sounded familiar and there was really no help. Ghost making footstep noises, apparently though, equals poltergeist, or noisy spirit in German. I researched the history and they're not ghosts but energies created by us humans allegedly. In the past they believed poltergeists were caused by teenage girls because of their strong emotions, and that for me was a bingo. My home at the time was a war zone of emotions, anger, sadness, cursing, yelling and fighting. Most of the issues were due to my twin sisters. Angela especially at the time was rebelling severely. She started hanging out with some bad kids and drinking and drugging and all that. My mum was strict, so they would fight bad about it, and once they even got into a small fist fight and the police were called. Of course, I'd get involved as well. Angela had very strong emotions. I was battling depression at this time due to being broke, and myself and my mum were bipolar. My sister Carla was clinically diagnosed as bipolar. But while researching, I learned that we could get rid of negative energy by bringing positive energy, like praying or saging your home, etc. Now, eventually, as I was up, my girlfriend woke up as well, and I told her that I heard the footsteps again and couldn't go back to sleep, and I told her about all of the research that I had found. She started doing some research of her own at this point. It was maybe around 15 minutes before 3 a.m., and my girlfriend says out loud, "I'm just waiting for it to be 3 a.m. because apparently that's when spirits are most active or something." I took it as a joke and sort of ignored it. But sure enough, at 3 a.m. on the dot, we heard the most aggressive, chaotic, and sporadic thumping yet. This time it was happening with no pattern, and it was all over our roof. My girlfriend grabbed my shoulder, terrified. I was paralyzed for about 3 seconds because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After coming back to my senses, I picked up my phone and started recording, but unfortunately it was too late. It must have lasted about 4 seconds or so. All I got on my video was my cat freaking out. The video was saved and recorded at 3:01 a.m. officially, and this was the turning point for me. The next day, I went to each of one of my family members one by one, told them what happened and about poltergeists. I also told them about what we had to do to remove this, and I told them that we have to chill out and no more fighting, work on our anger, let's pray at night together, and thankfully they actually all took it pretty seriously. We dialed it down severely, we saged the house, we prayed and read the Bible passages at night sometimes together. I proclaimed at our home that there was no room for negative energy, only positive energy, and we really did a 180 at this point. And amazingly, it actually worked. After some time, very suddenly it just sort of all stopped, not a peep. We never spoke about it as a family again, and I've been known to be one of the more responsible ones of my siblings. Aside from that time being very hard for me emotionally and financially, I have and am doing very well for myself, thankfully. Honestly, too, at the time, I really was the only one of the siblings that would have been able to handle this situation and turn it around, like I actually helped do. So, I'd like to believe that that's the reason why my room was the only ones that heard it. Maybe this occurrence happened in order for my family to be more at peace or something. Myself and Kylie are now married with a daughter. We moved into our current home on December 15th of 2023. When we settled in, we held hands and I proclaimed loudly to make sure that I was heard that in this house, there's no room for negative energy, only positive. My wife did her saging thing too and put oil on the doorways and prayed and all that. And thankfully, so far, so good. My mum and stepdad got married when I was 4. Mum and I moved into the house that my stepdad owned after they got married. It was just the 3 of us and our animals. I'm an only child, and at the time of the story, we had 2 big dogs who lived inside and out. The dogs usually roamed outside at night on the 20 acres that we owned. we lived in that house for about 14 years and I saw my fair share of creepy stuff, but this story, it definitely sticks out the most. A little bit of background first though. So, I was around 7. I don't exactly remember the age, but only the present that I got that year. I know that I was old enough to use the bathroom at night alone, but still young enough that my mum usually checked on me to make sure that I got back into bed okay. I also know for sure that it was Christmas Eve. I know this because our tree was always off at night, except for on Christmas Eve. Our house was pretty small, 850 square feet small, but I loved it. When you walked in the front door, you were immediately in the living room. Straight ahead was the hall. In reality, though, it was just a small rectangle that had doors on 3 of the 4 sides. From the living room or the front door, you could see into the bathroom. Heading to the bathroom, you had a closet on the left, a bathroom door, my bedroom door to the right, an empty wall the width of the door, and my parents' bedroom door as well. The kitchen was off of the left of the living room and shared a wall with the bathroom and the closet. It was super cute and just really cozy, and we also had an unfinished basement with the stairs in the living room by the kitchen door to the back porch. Now, I got up to use the bathroom Christmas Eve. I got up from my bed, went out of my bedroom door, and turned the corner into the bathroom. I, of course, being a kid, had to peek at the tree and the presents underneath. I thought that I saw a monster truck at one point. At the time, I was a huge fan and really wanted a remote control one, but I didn't stop to look because I really had to go. After I finished up my business, I got up and looked towards the living room. I really wanted to peek at my presents again before I went back to sleep. We didn't really close the doors in my house growing up unless we had people over, so I could see the front door and the glow of the tree from my seat. I looked back at the toilet to flush, and when I looked back up at the doorway, between the hall and the living room, I saw the silhouette of a boy. He looked about my age from his height, but he had his back to me, so I'm not sure what his face looked like. He was standing in the doorway using his left hand to hold the door frame so that he could lean into the living room on his tiptoes and peek at the presents, I think. In his right hand, he had what looked like like a red sucker or something. His whole body was dark because of the lack of light and the Christmas lights shining behind him. I shuffled to the edge of the bathroom, so I was just inside the doorway. If I had put my arm straight out, I could have actually touched this kid. I'm standing there, about to ask what he's doing when he slowly drops back down to his flat feet and starts to turn to face me. Now, as he starts to turn, I get the most intense feeling of dread, fear, and anxiety rush over me. I can see the profile of his face and he's just smiling, staring straight ahead. Just as he's about to get all the way around, my mum walked out of her room and asked me if I'm okay. And in the split second that it took to look at her and back at the boy, he was now gone. I instantly felt better, and it was as if he just never even existed. I pointed to the living room, and my mum assumed that I was trying to peek at the presents, so she just tucked me back into bed, and I fell asleep pretty quick, woke up, and I totally forgot about it the next morning. I did get my remote control monster truck that year too, which I was super stoked about. And it was years before it came back to me, and I told my mum about it. She wasn't surprised too because, well, like I said, a lot of weird stuff happened in that house. Before I got my car in my freshman year of college, I would use Lyft to get to work pretty much every day during the summer. During the winter or fall, though, I just walked, even at night. And in all of those Lyft cars and drivers, I never had any noticeable encounters, I guess. I've probably been in a couple of hundred by now, and aside from the occasional political opinion and speeder, it was all fine for the most part. Now one day, I order a Lyft car like normal. It'll be here in like 7 minutes. Cool. I walk outside a couple of minutes early to go and wait for my driver, and I see a vehicle that pretty much matches the description of mine sitting in my driveway. You know that sort of little car icon next to the profile that you can use to compare the real one? Well, it was the same color, the same size, and unless you noticed the little details, it pretty much looked the same. But my driver was still apparently 2 minutes away. I choose to ignore him, thinking that it's just a funny coincidence and maybe he's a friend of a neighbor or something. But then he rolls down his window and looks at me, so I go up to talk to him. Maybe he's just lost? By the way, too, a different race entirely from my actual driver, so I know for sure that it isn't him, but it's similar skin tones and age, I guess. He tells me that he's my driver, and pulls out his phone that has my profile, like how your driver has, to make sure that it's you. So, in my naive and innocent teenage mind, I think to myself, oh, Lyft must have accidentally sent me 2 drivers, and tell him that he's not the driver that I was told I would meet. Right as we're talking, my actual driver pulled up and rolled down his window. I explained the situation, and said that I'll probably get in the first guy's car because, well, he was here first. But then my actual driver says that I should probably go with whoever is on my phone. That sounded pretty logical to me and made sense, but before I could turn around and tell the other guy that I was going to go ahead and pick the other guy, he drove off. Tinted windows, by the way. It wasn't until I got into the car that my driver brought it to my attention how weird that actually was. He told me that in his 10 years of being a Lyft driver that nothing like that had ever happened to him or anyone that he knew. Then it suddenly dawned on me about what might have just happened. The similar car appearance to my actual driver, the fact that he had my info but I didn't have his, the fact that he was there a couple of minutes early, so if I did get in, it wouldn't have intercepted my real driver, and just everything. And, stupidly, I almost got into his car too. I went to work and I was totally shaken up that day. I tried making a report to Lyft, but without any evidence or information other than a basic physical description, there really wasn't much that they could do. My Lyft driver said that he would go ahead and tell the story to some other driver friends on a social media forum, Facebook probably, so that they could spread the word. And so, I guess that made me feel a little bit better about the whole thing. But that driver, he might have actually saved my life that day, and I think about him a lot. And hey, my dad heard about it too and got me a car in the end. So I guess at least I got something other than trauma. I've also only told a couple of people in real life due to the traumatic and scary nature of the whole thing. Looking back on it now, it was most likely a trafficker or kidnapper. These guys probably have access to Lyft servers and look for repeating customers like me. I've since deleted the app and my account, but I guess the lesson from all of this is always check the license plates. When I was a preteen, I lived in the old farmhouse at the top of the hill. It was the oldest building there and 2 or 3 blocks from the city cemetery. The cemetery was actually on a cliff and the police semi-regularly had to disband satanic groups that would perform rituals on said cliffs. My parents, they lived upstairs and I lived in the basement. There was my room with a twin-sized room and the spare bedroom with a king-sized waterbed. There was a long, thin room that served as a pantry, and at the end of it, a walled-off room that had a large metal container in it. I assumed it was used to store the fuel for the house back in the day. The upstairs was perfectly normal, and no one ever had any experiences there. It was only ever in the basement. The container room was a no-go for anyone. Dark shadows were always darting about, even though there were no windows and the only light source was a pool light in the pantry. There was a feeling, though, of impending doom in that room, as if you needed to run for your life as soon as you opened that door. Strange scratching noises emanated from the room late at night, even though we never found any signs of pests or rodents there. The spare bedroom only had one consistent activity, and it confuses me to this day. The water in the bed, it would shift and you would see sort of like little indents from on the comforter, like paw marks from an animal walking across the bed or something. My bedroom had voices, shadows, strange noises, and the lights going on and off at times. When you were in bed, sometimes you could feel a presence pushing down on your body too. This next part seemed to be the part, though, that people really couldn't handle, even though it was a really small thing looking back on it. You see, I had a boombox. This was before the time that remote controls were really being used, so the only way to change the channel was to rotate the knob on the boombox. We'd be listening to a station, and all of a sudden, it would sort of go out of tune, and we would watch the needle on the radio move to another station. It was always the same station, though, and it was nothing but static. You could go over and change the channel, but before the next song was over, it would change back to that static channel again. I don't remember the exact channel number, but I think it was 99 something. Anyway, this was the thing that really freaked me out, and the backstory here is that there used to be an air conditioning vent that ran between the upper floor and the basement. It had been removed at some stage, and outside of my parents' bedroom, there was this removable vent cover. You could open it and put the phone in there where the vent used to be. Yes, pre-cell phones and pre-cordless phones. This phone had a long line on it, so you could move it through the house for the most part, and there was an open hole in the ceiling of my room where I could then reach up and grab the phone from. So my parents' room was directly above mine, in other words, and they could stand in their room and have a normal conversation with me in my bedroom without anyone raising their voice. My parents, they couldn't go in their room for a private conversation though, because I could hear it like I was right there. So the part that freaked me out was that when I was being attacked by a force, I would scream bloody murder. I was known to have a very loud scream, but never, not once did my parents ever hear my scream during these attacks. I would always ask them the next day why they didn't come to help me, and they were always confused and said that they didn't hear anything. Which begs the question, how could they hear me talk in a normal voice, but not hear my screams at full volume like that? As an adult, I have some mental illness, so one could try to say that it's all in my mind. But then, how did my friends experience the same things when I never did tell them about it? And also, how do my parents experience these things too? As far as I know, all of these other people are mentally well, so I really don't think that it was in my head. About a year ago, I had two separate paranormal experiences, and the first experience, I actually had a witness. So I was out of town in New York doing work on an old Amish barn that was being renovated and turned into a house. I was 17 at the time, I'm 18 now, and still remember everything clear as day. We were on this job site for about a week, and we were staying in a hotel that our boss was paying for after we got off work. My cousin, who was working with me at the time, was sharing a room with me. We both just got home and were eating dinner on our beds. And now, in this room, there was a small table in the corner of the room adjacent to my bed. Both of us were sitting in the bed and eating, and nobody else was in the room. On the table sat a sign that said free Wi-Fi and had the hotel's Wi-Fi password written on it. But out of nowhere, this sign proceeded to be slapped into the air by some invisible force and managed to land in the 2-inch gap between the table and the wall. Up until this point, I never saw anything like this, and as soon as it happened, my cousin looked at me and just gave me a what the heck was that look. We had some trouble sleeping that night. Keep in mind, this sign weighed about half a pound and was made out of some pretty thick plastic. I mean, that thing wasn't going to move unless you really wanted it to. The next experience was only a few months later. I was working at an old townhouse built sometime in the 1800s. My dad had just left the site to get some materials, and I was shoveling mud out of this old basement. Nobody else was in the house except for me, and all the doors were locked. So, as I was shoveling mud into the garbage bags in that nasty basement, I heard heavy footsteps and faint talking upstairs, like somebody else was actively talking to another person. I assumed it was my boss and he was there to take pictures of the house for the investors, and went upstairs to go and greet him. And I'll restate that I was the only person in this house. I came up the stairs and turned the corner to go to the kitchen and called out for my boss. There was no answer. I was about to step into the kitchen when 3 brooms that were leaning up against the wall all fell down at the same time. I was already freaked out, so I headed straight out for the side door, and I kid you not, the 2 cellar doors that led into the basement slammed shut right in front of me. Now, these doors weighed about 100 pounds each and were made out of thick pieces of plywood. Not to mention as well that the doors were being held open by 2 hooks that were attached to the wall and to the door, so really there was absolutely no way that this should have been possible. I stayed outside for about 30 minutes in the freezing cold until finally my dad came back. And after that, I never went into that basement alone again. This is a bit of a long story, and there's a few things that I need to explain first, so please bear with me. So I wouldn't call myself a medium or anything of that nature, but my whole life I have felt like I have seen things and been connected to something that just never felt right. I've always had odd paranormal experiences that nobody else has had or seen around me. Both my parents had unexplainable feelings and premonitions. I don't particularly believe in that and would usually just push it off to everyone as just being crazy. Honestly, I have started to think that I was or am crazy. My mother used to see things that would come true as well, but not like see the future type thing, but see things that would have significance to events yet to come. For an example, one night after moving into her house, she had several dreams of snakes, visions of snakes everywhere, and she mentioned it to me, but I thought that she was just crazy. Nights later, her fiancé at the time got up to use the bathroom and stepped on something squishy. He flipped the lights on to discover a snake. They called animal control, only to discover an infestation of snakes in the attic. My mum was very artistic and would draw things and always talked about visions of apples and would always tell me, "Don't bite the apple." She would reference Snow White biting the apple and going into a deep sleep, Eve biting the apple, etc. Close to her passing, she made this reference a lot as well. Oddly enough, my mum was hospitalized and went into a coma where she passed away a month after being in the coma. It freaked me out honestly, and I'm sure you're probably thinking that it was just chance and that she died the same way that she kept mentioning. And honestly, that's what I thought too. My great-grandmother was in the hospital close to her death and said that my great-grandfather had been visiting her. He passed away years prior, and she said that he was coming to get her, allegedly. And days later, she passed. My father fell to his knees one day and said that he felt in his chest that something was wrong with our cousin. Shortly after, he got a phone call saying that he had been killed in a car accident. Now, to give a few references of these unexplainable events that have happened to me, I'm going to drop a few stories, and honestly, I would like to see what you guys think about it. Is it all in my head, or could there be a slight chance that maybe I'm not crazy? So, when I was a toddler, probably 3 or so, my mum and I were driving as we passed a wreck on the road. A semi had crashed a car and the vehicle was destroyed as it was under the semi. The vehicle was so bad that you couldn't tell the make or the model barely. As we passed by, I started shouting at my mum that it was my aunt, and my body just knew this, and I kept saying it over and over again. My mother reassured me that it wasn't, as you couldn't see the person trapped under nor tell the vehicle at all. We arrived at my grandmother's house, where we received a call saying that my aunt had been in a wreck and had went under that semi, and the woman trapped under was in fact her. Another time, when I was around 10 or 11, I went to visit some friends, family with them on a family trip in upstate New York. They lived down a back street, but all close by to each other in what felt like a family compound, I guess you could say. The first few days felt completely fine as well. But there was one night where we were all gathered outside. I believe that they were having a bonfire outside when all started telling ghost stories. As I was 11 or so, of course their goal was to try and scare me, which ultimately didn't work. And as the night progressed, I started hearing things in the surrounding woods, and then noticed a figure in the upstairs window looking down on everyone. I pointed it out, and when everyone came to look, as you would expect, nobody was there. I thought that it might have been a cruel prank until I realized that everyone was accounted for outside. For what felt like an eternity, I kept thinking about the figure in the back of my head as my thoughts raced. I saw the figure once again and made a slight comment about it, and at this point, the family sort of seemed annoyed that I kept bringing up something that just wasn't there. Later on in the night, my friend who traveled with me pulled me to the side and let me know that she did in fact see something as well, but was afraid that no one would believe her as they didn't believe me. Well, we left that next day, but the eerie feeling certainly remained. Now, I'm sure I know what you're thinking. Scary stories plus a child's active imagination equals seeing things that aren't real. However, just indulge me and keep listening. So on February 14th of 2014, I was in middle school. It was Valentine's Day and it was a Friday night before the weekend. That morning, my teacher handed out a word scramble for fun where you make as many words with the letters from the words you're given, like the game Anagrams. The words were Happy Valentine's Day. The first word that I came up with was death, followed by die. I kept circling back to those words and they repeated in my head over and over. The school day ended, and as I was walking home, my house was surrounded by ambulances and my grandfather walked to the bus stop and said that something had happened and we would talk about it later. To make a long story short, my stepfather had unfortunately died in his sleep from conjunctive heart failure. I moved from that house to live with another family member after his death, and when I turned 14, my great-aunt's boyfriend at the time had a heart attack and died too. They had been together for a long time, but he never married her, and he was often cold towards everyone in the family. And although they were together for a long time, he just refused to marry her. Several years prior, that was the last time that I had spoken to them, as my family were not close, and I mentioned the fact that they weren't married and asked why that was. To be fair, children have no filter and they just say whatever they think in that moment, right? But in that moment, I could feel the mood change and the tension could be cut with a knife, and his energy just felt sinister, like his spirit was just evil, almost as if he was surrounded by darkness. I hadn't spoken to them since that moment until I found out that he had passed away. My family consoled my great-aunt and we all helped her pack the house up to get ready to move in with us as she could no longer stay in that house. We finished packing up her house within about 2 days, and towards the end, my aunt pulled me aside and let me know how thankful she was that I was there, but told me that when her boyfriend was having his heart attack, he pulled her in and, in a sinister tone, told her, "If something happens to me, do not let your great-nephew in this house." Hearing that only caused me to have an off feeling while we were finishing up, but days after she moved into our home, I was sleeping when what felt like sleep paralysis started to kick in. I laid in my bed feeling helpless when I saw a figure creep over me, screaming at me, and I will never forget the words it said. "Get out." It screamed this at me, shaking me, and I just laid there still. It then raised its hand at me and struck me in the face. I sat up quickly out of my sleep in a state of shock and in fear, thinking that I had just had the worst nightmare I'd ever had. But it was then that I noticed that my face was burning from what I thought was just a dream, but when I touched it, I noticed that it was wet. I rushed to the bathroom, noticing that there was now a gash on my face and blood was dripping down. I never said anything because at the time my other family member that I lived with was having schizophrenic hallucinations and severe PTSD and being in the military and all that. She had said that she would see shadow figures, and I always assumed that she was just having another episode. I didn't want to trigger another episode, so I created a rational explanation and I just kept it to myself. But not long after that, I moved, and the house that we moved into was really nice. It was big enough for all of us and felt like a good fit. And during the showing of the house, the basement door had a lock on it. We were unable to view it at the time, but we were assured that it was nothing, and when we moved in, we had the lock cut, and to our disbelief, there was a letter and a pentagram painted in black on the wall. The letter stated that the previous tenant was involved in some sketchy activities like witchcraft, and she said that she went too far and opened something that she couldn't close, thus the move. Nobody really thought anything of it, to be honest, as we all had no belief in anything like that, and plus I had suppressed those previous experiences as I rationalized them to just being an overly active imagination. Time went by and we painted the wall eventually, but that pentagram just kept seeping through every time that we painted it, so in the end, well, we just sort of left it alone. There were often times, though, when we would hear things through the night, such as creaking, cabinets closing, footsteps running through the house, but we were a big house, so we always rationalized it. But at night, I distinctly remember hearing a kid's giggle and footsteps running through the hallway. Cabinets started slamming often, pictures would fall off the wall spontaneously. It got so bad that we ended up actually calling a priest out and asked him to bless the house. Well, we didn't mention the pentagram, and when he walked in, he walked straight down the stairs as if he was drawn straight to it. He blessed the house, and after that, we didn't have anything bad happen for a while. I was around 16 at that time when everyone decided to take a weekend family getaway, but unfortunately I had to work that weekend as my job only allowed me to work weekends due to school and all that, so I had to stay home. I came home one day and I suddenly had a cold, eerie feeling walking into that house, as I was a victim of home invasions when I was younger, so since then I've always been extremely paranoid and on edge, but this was way more than usual. We had several dogs and we lived pretty secluded, with neighbors just close enough if something happened you could call on them, but far enough that if we wanted privacy, we definitely had it. So I wasn't quite as anxious as I would normally be, but that eerie feeling just never left. I decided to call it a night eventually, and my dog followed me to bed. I was laying there tossing and turning for probably 15 to 20 minutes when I noticed that one corner of my room looked extremely dark, way darker than normal. And I mean, the bedroom window normally casted a shadow in that corner, but this time it was like pitch black, like I couldn't see through it at all. My dog peered her head up and faced the corner as well, and then she started growling. I tried to shush her, assuming that it was nothing, except she started growling louder and louder. The hair on her body stuck up, and now she was snarling. It looked like she had an extreme case of rabies almost, and I had never seen her like that, growling, barking, and even foaming at the mouth at the edge of my bed. I kept trying to calm her down when she lunged at the corner, barking as if she saw an intruder or something. I quickly turned the lights on, and the shadows in the room were filled with light, and she calmed down shortly afterward. I convinced myself that it was nothing, and I tried to go back to sleep. I laid back down, only to awake to the sound of her growling as she was before in the corner of the room. And it was then that I grabbed my pillow and I headed out to my car to sleep there for the night. But weirdly, as I looked back to my bedroom window, it was completely dark, and my stomach dropped from a feeling that is really difficult to explain. I never stayed in that house alone again after that. I refused to. And I haven't had anything like that happen for a while, as I live in an apartment with other people now. But every now and then I feel like I'm being watched. I have nightmares sometimes and sit up in the middle of the night in the darkness with unexplained fear. Honestly, I feel like I'm a pretty normal person. I guess anyway, with just some unexplainable things that have happened that I keep suppressing. But what do you guys think? Do you think that it's all in my head? I find myself trying to still rationalize everything with nobody to turn to who would believe me, or who wouldn't think that I needed to be locked up in an asylum. Hence, this is why I'm here with all of you guys. So again, what do you guys think? I told my friends what I'm about to tell you, and they urged me to share it here. It happened back in December, about a week before Christmas. So, I'm a 32-year-old guy currently using my GI Bill to go to college in a city in one of the mountain time zone states. I'm so busy with school and work, so I just don't really have time to go out and socialize often. I have to rely a lot on apps to go on dates, and I matched this really cute girl around my age. We had a good convo and we scheduled a date. It was at a bar restaurant, not far for either of us to drive to, so it was easy enough. She was very pretty in person and we got along great. During our conversation too, I found out that she worked in a non-cop role at the police station, like a receptionist essentially. I also learned that she had a roommate whom she said was out of town for the holidays. She added that she hated being alone because she had a crazy ex-boyfriend who stalked her apparently. I was a little bit uneasy at that, and I told her as much as well, and she said that he's harmless, so I kind of let it go. We had a few more drinks, and we're there for about another hour, and at her suggestion she said that we should go back to her place. And I mean, I wasn't about to argue with it. She was hot. She then insisted on driving, and I told her that I was fine, and she said no, that I had been drinking and she saw too many DUIs at her job. I got what she was saying, but I only had 2 gin and tonics and was fine, and again she insisted. I thought that it was weird, but I didn't care. Maybe she was just trying to be nice. Anyway, we went to her house, and the first odd thing that I noticed was that she walked up and just opened the door. She didn't unlock it is what I mean. It was already open, which I found very odd because she said that she had a stalker and that her roommate was gone. She started feeding her cat, and as she was doing that, I saw a bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter. I touched it and it was still cold, like it hadn't been there for a while. The cereal wasn't soggy either, I noticed. I asked her whose it was, and she hesitated and said that she ate a snack before heading to the bar. But it just didn't make any sense, and before I could say anything, she just kissed me and wrapped her arms around me seductively and said for me to take her to her room. Again, she was really hot, and I quit caring about the cereal pretty quickly. We started fooling around, and I went to close the curtains, and she told me to leave them open. A few minutes later, maybe 5 or so, we were in bed and my back was to the window, and she let out a huge gasp, a scared gasp. Her eyes were at the window, and I turned around and saw somebody in a hoodie, and they took off. I heard the steps running on her back deck. I immediately jumped up and ran out to make sure her doors were locked, and of course, the front door wasn't. I ran to it and locked it, and right when I did, the door started banging. I went to open it because I was gonna mess this dude up, or try to at least, and she told me to just go back to bed with her. I screamed at her at this point and asked if she was insane, and she told me that he does this and goes away. So I asked her you know that this is your ex?" And she said yes, and to not worry about it. At this point, he started banging on the side of the house on the other end, and she didn't seem at all to care and just kept trying to get me to go back to her bed. I didn't want to call the cops because, for all I know, this dude is a cop, or she'd know the cops that showed up and would take her side or whatever. I also couldn't just leave because my car was at the bar now, and quite honestly, I was pretty terrified as well. At this point, I started calling her out for the door not being locked, the cereal. I openly called her a liar. She couldn't come up with logical answers, and I had no idea what I was into at this stage. I shouldn't have done this, but my fight or flight was pretty much kicked in, and I told her that if this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I promise that I'm going to kill you both. I'm not hard like that or anything, but my fear told me to let her know that no matter what it was, that they would definitely have a fight on their hands at the very least. My thoughts of what were going to happen to me were all over the place, so in the end, I ordered an Uber off of my phone and I didn't tell her. I just kept arguing with her and asking what was going on, hoping to just keep her talking and in the room. I stayed right next to the door so that I could leave ASAP. Luckily, I never got my pants off and my jacket and shoes were right by the door, so I was able to get dressed pretty quickly. The Uber showed up and, without saying anything, I just opened her door and ran out as fast as I could. I looked back at the door and, weirdly, she was just standing there. It's only been a little over a month now, but I honestly have no idea what the heck I was into that night. I don't believe the story of just a girl with a crazy ex, based off of the factors that I've already told you. It feels like it was either a robbery or some sort of weird fetish type thing. I don't know, but it's definitely something that I'm very mad at myself for. I mean, I'm a 9-year Navy vet and allowed myself to get into a situation like that. I reported her account on the Uber ride back to the bar, and I told the bartender as well if they ever saw her again, just in case, but who knows. In any case, I'm just glad that I got out of there unscathed. A quick bit of background. I'm an American now living in Vienna, and this happened a few months ago. Life has been normal since then, so I don't think it really has any harm or anything on me, but I'll let you be the judge of that. So I was in my apartment when someone buzzed the entrance to our building. I was not expecting anything from Amazon or so, but sometimes when such delivery people need to enter, they buzz all the apartments in the building. I have a dog and he goes barking when they buzz, so I ignored that buzz and calmed my dog down. A few minutes later, they ring my apartment door. Again, my dog goes crazy, so I try to calm him down. A minute or two later, I answer the door and there's this man who seems to be ringing the door opposite of mine in the hallway. The lady that lives there never answers the door and is very private, so no surprise that nobody answered. But the man was tall, 50s or so, with glasses, dressed in a suit and a coat with a hat. Literally think of the spy emoji and you'll get the idea, minus the mustache and the glasses, but he was also wearing this earpiece thing. I'm not sure if it was a camera or a microphone, but it resembled a Bluetooth device from the mid-2000s, if that makes sense, and it was only in one ear. I'm noticing all of these things, but at the same time I decided to just sort of play along a bit. To be honest, I really wasn't sure what I was doing. I just figured if someone wanted to investigate me that I had nothing to hide, so why get all worked up about it? The man then says in German that he's looking for so-and-so family that live upstairs, and that he's been looking for them and trying to contact them for 2 years now. Odd too, because just the week before Amazon dropped off my package with them and I had to go to their door to ask for it, so I saw them and I know that they're there. I tell him that my German isn't that great, so then he asks if I want him to speak in English, French, Spanish, Russian, etc. I found that pretty interesting, and Out of curiosity, I said Spanish. I'm fluent. So from here on, the conversation between us was all in Spanish. I tell him that I don't know the family that well, but I saw them, and basically try to end the conversation. But then he asks me where I'm from, and I say the US. He tells me all this stuff about how back in the day he lived and worked in the US, and how he knew Kamala Harris back when she was a prosecutor and stuff like this. It was really weird, but this is some kind of clue to me that if it's true he was admitting to being some kind of an investigator, or maybe a spy or prosecutor or whatever, that he had connections. He asks me what state I'm from, and I say Texas. Again, this was all in Spanish, but I notice that as I'm saying this, he pulls his phone from his pocket and is kind of holding it directly in front of me. I start to think that maybe he's audio recording, but the screen looked dark, as in the phone was asleep. But he asks what state like 3 times. Nowhere in our conversation did he seem to have hearing problems, and all of a sudden his phone is out and he seems like he can't hear me. Something is off. I get weirded out, so I circle back and tell him that I don't have any other info of the family upstairs, and that's it. I say goodbye, and I close the door. So, do you guys have any ideas as to who this guy is or what he could be? Like I said, it was months ago, but I am definitely still on edge and still wonder about it. I mean, what was that weird earpiece thing? And if he were a spy, why make it so obvious? What about the phone thing? And if he was just looking for me or wanted info about something, why was he ringing the next door after I ignored the door a minute to calm my dog down? It was all really strange, and I just don't know what to think about it. This happened a couple of years ago, March 24th of 2022. I was 16 and had just got my license. My friend's family was going on a day trip to the beach, Pacific City, Oregon, and a few of our friends decided, since I got my license and a new car, that we would load up in my old 300ZX, take the T-tops off, and go for a nice trip to the coast. All was going well, other than the discomfort of 4 guys crammed into a small coupe on a 2-hour drive, but we eventually made it to the coast and had a really good day. After we had packed up our things and started to head home, my friend suggested that we take a road that he knew. It was an access road for anyone familiar with the Tillamook Forest, but it was to go back home instead of the main highway, and it would take about an extra 45 to 60 minutes, but he said that it was really nice and would be a nice change in scenery, so I obliged. The sun was setting, and in the thick forest it got pretty dark quickly, and before we knew it, there was also no cell service, no houses, and absolutely no cars, which is pretty typical for the mountain ranges between the Oregon coast and the Portland metro area, so it wasn't anything that I was too worried about. After about 10 more miles, I saw a green SUV, either a Dodge Durango or a Ford Escape, early 2000 models, hauling a 5th wheel crashed and off the side of the road. Being that nobody was around, I decided that we should probably pull over and see if everyone was okay, and offer any help that we could. It was probably 8 to 10 feet off the road on a slope, only caught by the trees that it had hit, and the 5th wheel was absolutely trashed. Both of the sidewalls were caved in with the contents of the RV spread all along the side of the drop-off. The SUV was filled with clothes and food wrappers. Almost all of the windows were shattered, and there were some pretty significant bloodstains on what was left of the driver door glass and the windshield, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary for how bad the crash was. There was no one in or near the car, and a truck had stopped by us, and we told him that we didn't see anyone, and that we would just be on our way, so he kept driving, and shortly after, we started our journey back on the road. But we had to go pretty slow as the conditions of the road were getting worse and worse, with massive potholes and cracks in the road, and it was definitely not intended for lower cars. I'd say about maybe 3 to 5 miles after the crash site, There was a pretty sharp right-hand turn with a pullover area on the apex of the turn. As my dim headlights lit up the trees behind the pull-off, I suddenly saw what looked like a pale man with saggy skin from what I could tell was fully naked, but was sort of behind some of the tall grass or shrubs, so could really only see up to the bottom of its stomach. But it had no hair and was kind of scrunched over like how you would imagine an old man hunched over, just staring at my car. It didn't have prominent features, but the biggest part that I remember is its eyes reflected my headlights, bright like a cat's eyes, and its whole body turned to keep looking at the car as we drove by. I really didn't know what to do or what to think of it, and my friends in the car were all staring behind us and claimed that it kind of leaned out of the shrubs to watch us drive off. We were all pretty freaked out by this, and we were discussing what we had just seen, whether we thought it was a tweaker that had crashed his car and just sort of walked off, or if it was some sort of paranormal creature or something. I kind of played it off as the first option, but the more I thought about it, it seemed like something that you'd see in a liminal space or bad AI-generated image or something. No eyebrows, no hair, pale white saggy skin like when a person loses hundreds of pounds in a small amount of time, except it was saggy on its cheeks and neck and arms, etc., but seemed scrawny and really frail. Well, in any case, we sped home and I kind of just told people the story when the subject of paranormal experiences came up, and I didn't think too much more of it. About July of 2023, my at-the-time girlfriend's brother and I were pretty close, and so him, his friend, and I were up driving through the trails of Dixie Mountain talking ghost stories and such when I told them this story, and her brother's friend said that he had seen the same crash and actually showed me a picture of the same SUV that I saw, but he said that he didn't see anything creepy. But it was kind of weird to know that somebody else that I knew had seen this crash too. I don't know what I saw or what happened, but it definitely scared me and my friends, and I've never been back on that road since that day. Maybe somebody here, though, has seen something or had a similar experience in the Oregon wilderness. I hadn't thought about it until I started sharing this story today. My partner and I were reading a book about cryptozoology and mythological creatures, and it made me think of this story because it's always just sat really uneasy with me. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I apologize that my storytelling abilities aren't really all that great, but this is what happened, and I really just don't have an explanation. I have suffered with sleep paralysis since I was a child. Throughout all of my years of dealing with this, I've had some truly horrific experiences. However, the one that I had a couple of days ago has been the worst one yet. So I woke up not feeling the greatest. I was up a few hours, and after not feeling much better, I decided to lay back down and try to nap it off. I was turned on my side, facing away from our bedroom door on the far side of mine and my husband's king-size bed. I felt my body relax, and I fell asleep rather quickly. The next thing that I remember is slowly opening my eyes and seeing our bedroom wall and the door that leads to our bathroom, as the bathroom door was closed. I then tried to move, and I couldn't. As I've been through this many, many times, I was already mentally telling myself that I was in sleep paralysis and I needed to focus on trying to move a little bit, such as wiggling my fingers. It's a tip that I learned online. However, I'm already feeling scared and I can feel my heart racing. I then hear the sound of our bedroom door open and close behind me as our bedroom door makes a very loud and distinct popping noise. I immediately thought that it was my husband coming in to check on me and thought that he'd be able to get me to snap out of this horror. But that thought quickly vanished as I heard heavy stomping running around the bed until they stopped directly in front of me, and I see a very large and tall black figure standing in front of our bathroom door. This is the same figure that I encounter in almost all of my sleep paralysis experiences. I can never make out any features, but before I can register any other thoughts, the larger figure lunges at me. I can never make out any other features, but before I can register any other thoughts, the large figure lunges at me. I feel the heavy weight of this thing on my body, and it feels like it's crushing me, especially in my ribs. As previously mentioned, I'm still laid on my side with both of my arms pulled up and my hands are tucked under my pillow. By now I've closed my eyes and I'm trying desperately to move. And that is when I feel teeth burying into my ribs. I don't know how to truly describe the awful feeling that this was, but it's an intense feeling of pressure, pain, and almost a tickling sensation, and it's one of the worst things that I have ever felt. At this point, I'm trying to thrash away and trying to scream, but I'm still completely paralyzed, and I feel like I have no air left in me, and I never am able to even make a sound. But I can literally feel this thing's mouth opening and closing in different spots along the side of my ribs. At this point, I'm mentally screaming and pleading to snap out of it. The next thing I know, I sit straight up in bed. My heart is racing, I broke out in a cold sweat, and I can still feel tingles in my ribs and on my left side. After my eyes dart around the room and I find it to be completely empty, I lift up my shirt to inspect my side. The skin is not broken, but the whole left side of my rib cage is bright red, like something or someone has been there. I've done a good amount of research on sleep paralysis and I understand the scientific explanation for it, but waking up with physical marks from these experiences, that is brand new to me and a whole nother thing. I have had a ton of anxiety when it's bedtime ever since this experience, and quite honestly, I find it a bit hard to believe that there's nothing evil or demonic about these sleep attacks. Pennsylvania, 2004. My dad was 15 and camping by himself in a forest one afternoon. He wasn't armed with much besides a hunting knife and his phone, with the only thing keeping him sheltered being his tent. After setting up and adjusting his tent, he decides to make a fort around his tent for protection using sticks and branches. He set off for a 1-hour journey, picking up and breaking off as many branches as he could find and dropping them off at the site. And after an hour and a half rolled by, he was pretty much done. He set up his fort and eventually he went to bed. It was about 8 to 9 p.m., I would say. After 3 hours of sleep, he woke up to the sound of a dog barking right next to his tent, about 30 feet, he said. He was kind of on edge about this, but didn't think too much of it, and just laid there with his eyes closed. After about 5 minutes of just laying there, that was when it happened. A hand grabbed into his tent and pulled him out of it. My dad then described seeing a creature, it being around 7 to 8 feet tall, pink skin, slits for eyes and a mouth, no nose, and incredibly jacked and ripped. My dad was paralyzed with fear and couldn't move his body at all. The creature held him right to his face, and my dad could hear the intense breathing of this creature. He described it as resembling that of a bull's breathing. As he could do nothing but stare at it, he noticed what appeared to be some sort of a device on its wrist, what appeared to be a watch or something. After about 3 minutes of staring at each other, the creature let him go and grabbed his leg, swinging him on the ground repeatedly with extreme force. 15 minutes of this passed and the creature finally stopped. It placed my dad back into his tent and wandered off. My dad was doing nothing but praying to Jesus in his head the whole time, but after he finally got a bit of a grip of himself, he called 911 but hung up shortly afterward, realizing that they would think that he was crazy for sure. He then called my aunt, but she wasn't responding, so he texted her a bunch of messages. His body and legs were in a lot of pain, but eventually he must have fallen asleep or passed out or something. When morning rolled in, he woke up and inspected the place, gingerly sort of limping around. And weirdly, nothing was touched. The place was just like it had been when he first set it up. Feeling uneasy, he left the forest, and it took him some time to get back with how sore he was, but eventually he made it back and he went home. And as far as I know, he never went back to that place. This happened back in October, and let me start with some context. I, female and 19, work at a typical photo studio that's placed within a retail store. I'm not going to name which one, but your first guess is probably correct. On this particular day, I was scheduled to work 3 to 7, which was our closing hours. And unless there's an oversaturation of appointments in a particular time, it's usually only one employee working at a time. It's in the basement of the 2-floor retail store tucked away in a little back corner. Now, on this particular day, I'm coming in to close the studio. My manager and co-worker were there at the time, and they were both getting off at about 3:30. I clocked in at our computers and started chatting with my boss about where we were. There was one family in the camera room, and they were running a little behind. She told me about my assigned family, and also encouraged me to get what's called a pull-in. Basically, where we try to get customers from the retail store to come and take photos in whatever they're in exchange for 2 free photos fully shipped and covered. There was a man wearing a prison-looking uniform. Definitely didn't look real, but it looked like a costume or something. It was October anyway, so it wasn't crazy that he was wearing a costume. It wasn't Halloween weekend or Halloween day though, which I thought was a bit weird since he didn't have any appointments or was standing around with practically barren areas of the retail store next to the studio just sort of wandering. I don't think my boss got a good look at how he was acting yet because she asked him if he wanted to come in for some photos. She said something about how he already had the costume and it would be perfect. I didn't hear much of this because I was checking in with the next family. My boss walked by me as I was about to head in to set up the studio and let me know that the guy was interested in some photos after this appointment. The family that I was working with was great and things went smoothly, but I noticed during the session that he had come to sit on the bench closest to the photo studio. No big deal, but this bench is usually used for parents to watch or put their belongings on, but it's not like he was expected to know that, so it wasn't a big deal. My boss popped into the photo room one last time before she left and told me something along the lines of, "Hey, I'm getting some weird vibes from that guy that you're going to photograph, so I'm going to have Andrew, the retail store manager, come by and check in and make sure that everything's going all right." After taking the photos, it takes me a few minutes to edit them. The customer goes out and I stay in the camera room just doing the editing on the computer and all that. So the family went and sat down at a different bench. At this point, the guy started walking into the studio and asking when it was his turn. It was at this point too that I noticed his crowbar was actually real and not a prop. It started to make me a bit nervous the way that he was swinging it around a bit. I told him that I'd be able to help him in a minute and to go and wait outside. Well, he's outside and he starts sitting down at the bench and folding over on himself, sort of nodding off and snapping back up and moving around. I'm not stupid and I know that he's on drugs, but it was just me, him, and the single mum and her 2 children. I stopped paying attention to my editing and I started paying attention to him a bit. I could tell that he was starting to make this family feel uncomfortable. He started waving around the crowbar in a dangerous way too. I was concerned about the glass and my safety. He walked back into the studio a few times and wasn't taking no for an answer now, continually barging into the studio and asking, "When are you going to take my picture?" with this horrifying dead look. I finally got done editing the family's photos and I was practically shaking at the checkout. The mum that I was working with tuned into the situation pretty quickly as well. The guy kept looking over the computer and trying to see her photos. She loudly asked, "Can I help you?" To which the guy just sort of responded, rambling more about how he was supposed to be taking pictures. She whispered over to me, but I was sure that he could still hear it, and she asked me if I was okay. I took out their appointment paper and said out loud something about the price and wrote on the paper that he wasn't going away and that my manager was supposed to be on the way to help. At this point, it had been about an hour and a half since my co-workers left, by the way. She seemed still on edge, but we went through with her transaction. At this point, I felt completely paralyzed. I was one card swipe away from being alone in this tiny studio with this crazy drugged-out man with a real metal crowbar, no less. I went to scan her card on our studio card scanning machine, and by the grace of God, her card wasn't working on our local system. If the card won't scan on the local system, we have to reprint the transaction and check out a regular register inside the retail store. And I saw this moment as an out. I grabbed the new printed paper and walked her over to the registers at our salon. The second that I was out of the man's eyesight, I burst into tears, explaining what happened to one of the salon guys. He immediately pages the manager over our phone, and they asked me if I'd like to wait in the break room or the salon. I would have had to have walked past this man to go to the break room, so I just stayed put there in the salon. The mum who was helping me throughout the whole experience told me afterwards that there was no way that she was going to leave me alone with him no matter what. That was very reassuring to me, and I was very grateful for it. I had to wait it out for them to kick him out, but the manager got another guy and they both went to confront him. After about 15 minutes of no words, I peeked out to see if the guy had left the studio yet, and he was gone. All I can say is thank God that I didn't have any other appointments that night, but I still had to sit alone in that studio the rest of the night, and every time the elevator went off, it startled me a bit for sure. It took a while to recover from that, and I still get a bit uneasy working alone sometimes. I think the scariest part of it all is what I didn't see, because about 45 minutes later, the manager of the store came by and checked in on me. I asked him about the guy, naturally, and how kicking him out went, and he proceeded to tell me that this man became absolutely furious, causing a complete scene, threw his crowbar to the ground near the manager, and after getting more security over to help, they were successfully able to escort him out. I was supposed to wait outside for an Uber after work that day, but instead I decided to wait in the studio, and I got a ride home from my mum. So for some context, I, a 30-year-old female, work at a warehouse from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., and my commute is about 30 to 40 minutes, depending on traffic. Usually after work, I stop at a grocery store, just to get some stuff for dinner or snacks for my kids or whatever. My brother is one of the managers in the morning shift, and there's 2 other co-workers with him. At the time of the morning, they're working on produce, which is in the back part of the store, where there's a swing door with 2 large windows, so sometimes I'll tap on the window and say hi to them and go on about my day. Anyway, about 3 months ago, I had to go on an LOA due to personal reasons, and I was supposed to return to work a week ago, but my return to work paperwork is still pending. I never told anyone at work that I was returning, since they're not the ones that deal with it, and it's a whole different department that's in a different state, but last night I got a message from a team leader telling me that she was reaching out to me to let me know that she understood my intentions on returning back to work. I thought that this was a bit weird because, well, my understanding is that they can't reach out to ask questions if you're on medical leave. I just texted her back that my paperwork was pending and that the department in charge would reach out to her soon, and she said thank you and asked if I had forgotten the doctor's paperwork. I was confused and told her that I would reach out to the LOA department. I went to bed at around 5 a.m. and a co-worker messaged me asking me why I left earlier. I thought that she had sent the message to the wrong person, so I ignored it and tried to go back to bed. 30 minutes afterward, my friend or co-worker texted me saying, "Hey, I heard you came back to work today but left." I replied, "No, I haven't returned to work yet. Who told you that?" At this time, I thought that it was probably somebody that looked like me, but she replied with, "Anna told me that she saw you and that you were walking to the office." Now, the thing is that we have to scan a key to go in, but since I'm on LOA, even if I return to work, I wouldn't be able to use it for like 2 weeks, which is the time that it takes them to have all of the information in the system again. On Sundays, there are only 20 people compared to the 200 plus Monday to Friday, so everyone knows each other pretty well there. I found out that the reason the team leader messaged me was because she apparently saw me go to the office and leave. The 2 other co-workers that messaged me thought that they saw me too, but at a different time, and one of them saw me go into the office as well, looking around and heading back to the parking lot. It was weird, but I convinced myself that maybe it was somebody else. Well, my brother texted me about an hour later asking if I was just there by the onion table and asked me why I didn't say hi today. I told him that I was still laying down and that I wasn't back at work yet, so I wouldn't be there this early right now. He genuinely thought that I was messing with him too, since I told him that I was returning to work last week, but I had forgotten that I'd never told him about the delay. He told me that all 3 of them saw me though by the onion table and that I just looked straight ahead and kept walking. He messaged me at 6:20, which is the time that I would normally be there after getting off of work, which means that 6 different people saw me at separate times in different places, doing a routine that I usually do, while I was definitely home the whole time. I started feeling a bit panicked by this, and I called my mum to try and calm down, but I just really cannot stop thinking about it. Especially since, like I said, there's no way that somebody can get into that office, even if it was me, without all the details and the card and everything. Honestly, I have no idea what's going on, but it's really starting to freak me out. I worked as an EMT security at a very large facility with multiple apartments, restaurants, shops, etc. As security, we're also in charge of any fire and life safety, which included checking eye wash stations. It involves turning on the water for about 5 minutes, testing the water temperature, and signing off the tag. I worked the night shift and typically would do the kitchens around 3 in the morning because no one was there. There was one particular kitchen though that I hated doing because I always had the feeling of being watched there, which was so much worse when all the lights in the campus were off. When doing foot patrols, I always felt someone was standing at the entryways watching me throughout that building. To add some context, earlier in the night, my coworker was showing me his new shoes that he had gotten and was excited for our nightly patrols to wear them in and all that. Now, during our interior patrols, we normally drop everyone off at a different part of the campus since it's so large to get it done quicker. I entered the kitchen and turned on my phone flashlight to see the eye wash station. I turned it on and waited a few minutes. I then turned it off and started filling out the tag. And while writing in the date, I heard footsteps and saw legs and shoes, maybe about 2 feet away from me, out of my peripheral. They looked like my friend's new shoes, so instead of glancing up, I sort of giggled and said, "Wow, you really are trying to break them in. How did you finish your building so quickly?" After no response, I quickly looked up and I saw no one there. My heart sank pretty quickly, and I then heard my friend call out over the radio that he had cleared his building and was into the next one, way across the campus, mind you. I did do a quick walk through the kitchen and I found no one there, which really freaked me out. That was about 5 years ago now, and I still remember it so vividly. I tried to tell myself that I was just tired, but I've heard so many co-workers tell stories about that building that really I'm not so sure anymore. For as long as I can remember, I've had vivid dreams about UFOs. They come and they go, sometimes disappearing for months, even years. But when they return, they're intense, more real than dreams should be. My house is surrounded by a forest, and in these dreams, the lights always appear above the treetops, silently hovering before descending closer. Recently, the dreams have become more frequent, and the details sharper, almost as if they're trying to tell me something. The lights move in strange, impossible ways, darting at incredible speeds, stopping suddenly, and then hovering without a sound. There's an overwhelming silence in the dreams as well, suffocating and heavy. Even though I don't always see figures, I feel them watching from behind the light. These dreams don't feel random, they feel deliberate, like something is trying to reach me. Since childhood, I've dealt with sleep paralysis, which often accompanies these experiences, but not always. When it happens, I wake up fully aware but completely paralyzed, unable to move or even cry for help. A crushing weight presses on my chest, and shadows gather around me, short, dark figures standing just at the edge of my vision. Sometimes they shift slightly, as if they're whispering among themselves. Other times, glowing red and orange orbs appear, about the size of a volleyball, hovering in my room. They pulse with an eerie energy before disappearing as quickly as they'd arrived. When the paralysis finally breaks, I often wake up screaming, gasping for air. My wife knows this well. She's had to shake me awake many times, trying to calm me down while I catch my breath. Our house has been the site of countless strange phenomena over the years too. Flickering lights, objects moving on their own, and an overwhelming sense of being watched in certain rooms. One time we even received a strange voicemail message. That recording had no missed call attached to it, and went straight to voicemail. Just an unidentifiable voice whispering in a language that we couldn't understand. We are a large family, 5 children, 2 dogs, 5 cats, and 5 chickens. Life in our home is always full of energy and activity. None of my kids had ever had any complaints about any phenomena, but sometimes the animals do behave strangely. Like, for instance, the dogs refuse to enter certain areas of the house for no reason, while the cat sits still for long periods, staring into empty corners as if watching something only they can see. It's nothing overtly alarming, but just enough to make us wonder if they're sensing something invisible. Some of these strange events have been caught on video too, while others have been only witnessed. Doors opening on their own, strange flashes of light in dark rooms, and orbs floating through the air as well at times. Things recently took a more disturbing turn. You see, on December 24th of 2024, during breakfast, my wife noticed something odd on our front door security camera. Intrigued, we checked the footage. Both the front door camera and a wide-angle camera on the corner of the house captured the same event, a glowing orb moving across the yard. It wasn't faint or ambiguous. You can even see the orb reflecting off of my car near the end of the footage. It triggered our motion activity lights as it passed by, and it was in the middle of the night, around -15 degrees Celsius. There were no insects, no birds, no reasonable explanation for it. Then, on January 17th of 2025, our backyard camera recorded something even stranger. A shadow passed over the snow-covered ground, briefly blocking the moonlight. It rotated steadily above my house, but there was no visible source, nothing in the sky or around the house that could have cast it. Only a few days later, on January 21st, our side doorbell camera captured another mysterious orb. This one moved with purpose, but not like the dust or the debris that you normally see. Something gliding steadily through the air. it looked disturbingly similar to what we had seen on December 24th, raising more questions than answers. My wife, she's practical, a down-to-earth person. She's never believed in UFOs or the paranormal, always the rational one in our relationship, to be honest. But after living through years of strange occurrences and now even witnessing these recent events on camera, even she cannot explain what's happening. The videos really do speak for themselves. Something unusual is happening around our home, something that feels connected to my experiences. These strange encounters aren't new to me, that's for sure. They've been with me since childhood, in fact, sparking a lifelong fascination with the paranormal. For nearly 10 years, I traveled across Canada and the United States in search for answers, visiting places known for strange phenomena and chasing the unexplained. It became a part of my life, in fact, a relentless pursuit for the meaning in the chaos. But something changed along the way. The activity at home, it began to intensify after each trip, almost like I was bringing something back with me. Every time I returned, the strange phenomena grew worse, more unexplainable sounds, more objects moving, an overwhelming sense of being watched all the time now. It became too much in the end. And so, after 10 years, I quit cold turkey, cutting myself off from the paranormal field entirely. The activity at home slowed down after that as well, though it never truly stopped. It felt like whatever had followed me had lost interest, or at least for a while. To be clear as well, I'm not claiming to know what any of this means. I'm not saying that I've been abducted, nor am I trying to convince anyone of anything. But when I piece everything together, the vivid UFO dreams, the sleep paralysis with shadow figures and glowing orbs, the strange voicemail message, the videos that we've captured over the years, and the recent sightings, it's really, really hard to ignore the connection now. Maybe it's all coincidence. Maybe it's just in my mind, and my mind is weaving patterns where there are none. But sometimes, late at night, when I wake up and feel that heavy, lingering presence in the room, I cannot help but wonder if something is watching. Something that doesn't need to come often, because it already knows I'm here.